everybody. Well, we're doing the superhero stream tonight. So, let's see if we get this ball rolling. We got a thunderstorm going on here, so if we lose power, don't be surprised. I'll update on Twitter if that's the case. So, I'd like to go ahead and introduce my guests. Let's see. Currently, we have my co-host Mike, as always.
Hey.
And then returning from the last time he was on the stream, which would have been the Webmaster stream I did way back when, is Sam.
Hey, everybody.
And returning from the Brawler stream is James.
Good evening.
So, well, there's only one place to start, really, and that's the beginning. And now there's an echo on my side. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Well, Marvel first started out as the predecessor of Marvel was Timely Comics, and they had Captain America, the Human Torch, who was an android, and Namor, the Submariner. But DC didn't even have the Joker as Batman's major archenemy yet. That's the beginning, right? The 30s. We want to start there.
We're not covering the history of comics, Mike.
I sure hope not, because I'm really crappy in this area. Our guests, Sam and James, actually know what they're talking about in comics. They're going to run circles around me in that regard.
I can hold my own for the most part, but...
Oh, also, Snarbu says there's a little bit of echo on your side.
Yeah, I see that. I'm not actually sure how to fix that, to tell you the truth.
Oh,
so
shucks.
One moment, everybody. But feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
So, anyone else kind of hate the Joker by now?
I mean, he's been really, really overused and overplayed, and I mean, I think at this point, he needs to be reserved for extreme situations, because they went just about as far as they could go recently with the Batman Who Laughs, which is literally a Jokerized Batman from the other dimension. And I'm like, okay, we've done everything with Joker that we can do at this point.
It's okay. I'm sure they can find a new something else to latch onto that'll, at the expense of, villains I like more, like Mr. Freeze or Two-Face or what have you. I have my biases. It's not that I have anything against the Joker per se, but,
You can't hear them now?
Nope.
Ledger and all, but he is not the end-all, be-all of movies.
Prometheus sucks. Did anyone hear that?
That is the echo going.
So, is there still an echo? Okay, Snarb. Also, I see... Oh, that's good. Also, I'm seeing Great White North popped in, so appreciate that. And thanks for the quick shout out.
Echo? No echo?
Yeah. Betty's right here with me, and she's checking to confirm if there's an echo. So, if none of you guys can hear an echo, it's just up to the stream to tell us if there's an echo, or the chat, pardon me.
I'll jump back in.
Oh, that's good. All right. You wouldn't be able to hear it there anyway, because if you don't have it muted, then you would have a horrible echoing. Anyway, so yeah, pretty much.
Echo's gone.
Okay, she just confirmed it for me. So
You may want to turn up your
Nope.
mic, though. You're a little on the quiet side.
one moment. That I can't seem to fix. It's at max as it is.
They commented you were quiet last time, too, I think.
So wait, Snarb, you can't hear anybody else?
Okay, so then what I did was not good.
Okay, Snarb, can you hear anything? Oh.
52 was, except like a massive reboot that like nobody liked.
How about now?
So,
Well, I wouldn't
Go
put
for
it that there were some cool things in it, but it I think I hit my limit of everything was wrong.
Yeah.
Because I'm old, so there are only so many of those I can take. It's like I bought. It's like I have about 4 issues of everything was wrong. It's like after the 5th,
Yeah,
I
we're
think
trying
I'm
to treat
think
everything
I'm gonna tap
over here,
out.
Snarb. So, just so you
yeah,
guys know,
I mean,
Sam, Mike, James,
go.
for the last couple minutes, no one could hear you guys.
Yeah, no, I saw that Snarb said. I do have the chat open.
So,
Yeah, I saw that in the last.
Betty apologizes.
That's okay. I don't know.
Can they
I
hear
don't know
us
if they.
now?
I wish I could still hear.
Yep, but he says the echo has come back.
Yeah, the echo will be back. I haven't solved that.
I
I think it's just gonna have to be one or the other. I don't
yeah,
know.
we should probably just go ahead and just work with it. Sorry about the echo, everybody. So,
Well, at least a thunderstorm hasn't killed you yet.
Yeah.
eh,
Try it now. Is it gone?
how about now? Is there an echo there, Snarp? You want to go check it out?
I haven't boosted your volume yet, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah. Hang on, Betty's checking out something else. And we have O2 in the stream. Who hears an echo?
No, it's still an echo.
Not
Let me
I.
turn on the screen.
It's like you've got double microphones. I just...
This is very strange. Can't let it go too long, though, or we'll just be basically spending the whole stream time trying to solve my problems.
Look, how about you pass the echo off, speaking as one of the Watchers or some cosmic force or whatever? Because, you know, it kind of gives you that sort of authority in a way.
Yes.
For Super Friends Black Mana.
Yeah, echo's still coming through.
It's not going to be too much of a deal breaker. Okay, O2 says it's not annoying, so there's that at least.
Oh, that's good at least. Okay.
Yeah, I just popped the stream sound on myself, and
Check and see.
yeah, I don't think it's a deal breaker. Like I
Can anyone
said,
hear
it
me at
does
all?
make you. Oh,
I can
okay.
hear you.
Okay, you guys.
I
are probably,
hear you.
You guys are probably hearing me through Discord, but I don't think anyone's hearing me through.
I will check.
Or are they? Let's just keep talking, and Betty's going to check on her end. And then after that, we really need to kick this off.
Yeah.
And hi, Betty.
Hi, Betty.
Yo.
I'm not sure if she heard you or not, but
Have them say something.
all right, everyone go ahead and say something one at a time. Mike,
Choco Taco.
Sam,
Good riddance, Dan Didio.
LDO.
James.
Avoid acclaim games. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's good advice generally.
And Prometheus sucks.
I just couldn't think of anything else. That's.
I can hear everybody.
Okay, Echo's gone.
I should have said avoid LJN games.
You are super
Okay,
quiet.
but-
I mean,
Please.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, now she's going to go ahead and try and fix the audio so that I come through a little louder.
all right. Snarp said it works. Thankfully.
Yes.
Murphy's Law. What can you do?
I don't like the sound of that thunder out there.
You're in Discord
Oh,
for the
no.
audio, right?
Yes.
So we just boost your Discord. Oh, that's right. It's a fucking website.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get good options here.
Okay. She is messing with the volume in Discord. See if that helps anything. That's correct. Do I sound any louder now?
Not to me.
How about now?
No.
I'd have to turn on the stream itself, actually.
I think we have to ask chat whether or not how your volume's changing as it's being adjusted, because it keeps sounding the same on our side.
More options
Yeah.
in the Discord app.
Okay. I may switch over to the app in the future instead of the website because apparently there's more options for audio there.
We'll play with it.
We'll play with it. But in the meantime, let's just go ahead and get rolling.
The irritating echo is gone, and everybody.
At least the echo's gone. Hooray!
Yeah. Yeah.
No kidding. My test phrase should have been Batman v Superman is the worst superhero movie I've ever seen, but that's neither here nor there.
I don't know. I think Batman and Robin and Superman 4 and 3 are still pretty up there too.
So you've never seen that Justice League movie that was supposed to be on CBS, but they never aired it.
Oh.
Was it the mid-90s one?
Yes.
What was it an unreleased like super budget film like the Robert Corman Fantastic Four?
No, it was supposed to be a TV pilot, wasn't it, James?
I think it was.
Yeah, and it had like
David
Guy
Ogden.
Gardner.
David Ogden Steers is Martian Manhunter, and the guy playing the Flash had a spray painted Batman mask. It looked like.
Oh wow, that sounds crazy.
Justice.
I saw the bootleg years ago,
Holy
and I
cow.
just there were cool people in it, but that needs some work.
Justice League of America is a 1997 American superhero television film and unsuccessful. Oh, cool. I'll post that in the chat for. Also, Snarbu, you said while we wait, I must ask. You didn't ask what you were going to ask, so
Yes.
go ahead and
Snarb,
ask it.
What do you have to ask? Hey, Snarb, am I coming through any louder now?
Oh, he'll weigh in that until further in. Okay, fair.
What's that?
All right. I guess we're getting as good as we're getting now. So we're already 15 minutes into this.
Yeah. Yes, I'm much louder.
Good.
Okay. Leave it to Betty. She's a technical wizard.
Yay! Thank you, Betty.
It's just poking around the options.
And she just plays it off by saying it's just poking around the options, but I know better.
You also did a cool job with the layout graphics there too.
Yes.
Yeah, she's not
As
back on yet, so
always.
she couldn't hear that, but if anyone wants to repeat that, go right ahead.
I said she also did a great job with the layout graphics too.
Ort. Zach. Newt.
All right, let's get this ball rolling. We're going to start at the beginning, which in this case would be Superman for the Atari 2600.
One of my favorites.
Oh, yes. So we'll start with you, James. What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts on it, pretty much, it's amazing that all the way back then they built an entire game around Superman, just the concept of him, instead of just trying to shoehorn him into an existing type of game engine. I mean, you've got all the classic stuff there. You got the Daily Planet, you've got Lois Lane, you've got Lex Luthor breaking out. Instead of having some kind of life bar, the task is to do everything that Superman has to do within a set time limit. So it's not just, oh, well, we can't make a Superman game because he can't be killed. It's like, no, you just follow the Superman story template at the time, which wasn't about big fights. It's about doing what he has to do. So you had to fix the bridge. You had to get the criminals back in jail. Lois Lane helped you. I mean, it's amazing that they came up with something like that at that time, and then decades later, you've got developers complaining about they can't make a Superman game. It's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, it's a load. How about you, Sam? Ever play or see that one in action?
I have seen it in action, but I have never actually played it, and I think like sum total of amount of time that I've seen it in action maybe adds up to 2-3 minutes. So I don't really have anything to contribute on this discussion, unfortunately, because I've never played it. This is before my time. So,
well,
sadly. But I mean, it's crazy to think that they tackled that problem, and they knocked it out of the park because of just the limitations that they had to work with in terms of the console. It's crazy to think that they actually nailed the spirit of Superman with something so primitive. I don't want to say primitive, but something so early on in the video game, the home console generations.
Agreed. How about you, Mike?
It's the truth.
I also haven't played it too much, but I am familiar with the premise of it being more about objectives and, doing what Superman actually does, a la the Max Fleischer cartoons, where he, keeps a building from toppling over like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or smashes an evil doctor's death ray or whatever. The only other game I can think of that gets anywhere near close to the concept that this one did, I forget if it was in the 6th or 7th gen, but there was a game based off of the movie Superman Returns, where the life bar was actually the city of Metropolis's life bar. Superman himself couldn't be killed, but he had to defend the city the best he could. And that is such a cool novel concept that I wish wasn't in otherwise such a flatly mediocre license title. But, as it were with this one, I do find it kind of maybe not ironic. I do find it kind of bemusing that both the best Superman film and the best Superman game were in the late 70s, and they have never been surpassed since then. Really? What 40-ish years later, why can't we get Superman right again? Is that because everyone's just so concerned that every film necessarily needs to end in as Rob says, a CGI punch fest? Where have we gone with society,
That's how it seems.
Yeah.
It's just kind of sad.
Just remember, you will believe a man can fly.
That's right.
Yep. And hey, Betty in the chat, and hey, a song, how you doing?
Yep, how's it going, Song? Glad to see you made it.
Yes.
So, as far as my own thoughts on Superman, that was one of the, I'm not going to say one of the first games we got for our 2600 when I was a kid, but it was definitely one of the earlier ones. And I played that so much. Got to the point where using a couple of exploits I discovered I was able to clear the game in 11 seconds.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah. It's just a matter of standing in the right place at the right time and then pressing the right button so the game will actually pause. There were a few 2000 games that had, pause features. That just happened in one of them.
I'm sure you could break Adventure in two if you know what you were doing with that one.
Yeah, but we're not here to talk about Adventure.
Yes.
Okay. Well, DC had their shot, so inevitably Marvel was going to have their shot, which brings us to Spider-Man for the 2600. Hey, James, how about you lead us off on that one?
Okay, that was another great game, and instead of just being lazy and copying Crazy Climber, they took something that was pretty unique to Spider-Man, which is the web line action going on. And the more I think about that, the more it's amazing to me that they were able to get that to work the way they did. I can't remember the programmer's name though.
Yeah, it's escaping me at the moment too.
But she did a good job on. Not even a good job. She did a great job on getting that to work, so little kids like me back in the '80s could get a grasp of the game. It was a new mechanic, but once you got the hang of it, it wasn't that. It just felt kind of natural.
I hear that. That was definitely something that grabbed me as a kid in the '80s at the time too. So, Sam, have you played or really even seen this one?
This one I have played. I did play the 2600 Spider-Man game, and I think I got to third stage. I mean, I didn't have an Atari growing up, so this was over at someone else's house. But it seemed pretty fun for what it was. Granted, I was playing this much later than it had been released, and alongside late generation NES games, so my memories are a little bit more unkind to it because I was comparing it to NES games of the time. But I think my only real puzzle was why you couldn't stick to glass as Spider-Man, and I think that just kind of stuck in my head as a weakness of Spider-Man's, and so I would get into arguments with people on the playground, no, Spider-Man can't stick to glass. What are you talking about? Just based on Spider-Man 2600 game. So,
how about you?
And that's one of.
Oh no, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just gonna say really quickly. One of the things about these games is just the fact that many of them were a gateway into superheroes before people even got into comics. They you got into the well, really not the movies as much back then, but you got into the cartoons that were on TV. You got into whatever movies happened to be out, and the video games just became one of the biggest things for that. It was really a great gateway to it. So that's all. Go ahead.
Yeah. I can't argue with that at all. That's how I first basically learned about superheroes. All right, so Mike, what do you think?
I'm not super familiar with this one either. I'm not sure I have too terribly much to contribute. All I can say is that I'm impressed that despite how primitive the characters are, you can very obviously tell that you're playing as Spider-Man and that you're being marauded by the Green Goblin. They got his colors and the glider and everything, and they were able to do that with just, how much technical constraints that they had to work with. Also, the programmer in question was Laura Nikolic, if I'm pronouncing that right. Who also did the ColecoVision version of There's a Frogger 2. Oh, okay.
Yeah, there is.
But I don't have too much more to add in this one, but it is quite a neat early game. I would say that I think maybe I like the Superman game better, but this one's still pretty neat for what it is.
Yeah. And I see we have Rex Warden in the chat. Welcome.
Hey, Rex.
How's it going, Rex? I know who that is.
Oh, cool. So, glad you can make it. Now, as far as me and Spider-Man, that was one of those games I also played a lot. It was actually pretty competitive with me and my brother and sister. One thing I noticed, though, it just got faster and faster and faster. So, that and the constant running out of web fluid was irritating. but yeah, it was comic accurate as far as I knew.
Yeah, it was irritating for the in-comic Spider-Man too. That used to be a constant thing popping up in the middle of a fight. He'd have to worry about changing it, get another web cartridge.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading a couple of those when my brother was collecting in the late 80s. But he had a few reprints of some of the earlier ones. So, I honestly can't think of any other superhero games from that early era. There may have been some on Intellivision or ColecoVision, but I never had either of those, so I haven't really explored the libraries on those either. Anybody else?
I think the only other games that were out in the very early 80s that I remember were what's the name of it? The Quest Probe text adventures. Well, they weren't just text, but
those were the PC
I can't remember the
games,
name of those types of games. Yeah, they were for the different computers at the time.
Yeah, I believe Spidey had one, and I know that Hulk had one.
Yep.
I forget who else.
Hulk, Spider-Man, and there was one with the Human Torch and the Thing.
Interesting.
So half the Fantastic Four. And the crazy thing is the X-Men almost got one, but something happened with the company that was putting that out, and it didn't happen. But related comic book that was going to go with it, that story appeared in Marvel Fanfare, but I don't remember which issue.
Oh, interesting.
Marvel Fanfare was Marvel Fanfare. That was an anthology book that rotated stories either from month to month, or sometimes they would have a story run through a few months. Like there was a really good Black Widow story where most of that was drawn by the late George Perez. But they sometimes, if the story couldn't fit in anywhere else, they would put it in Marvel Fanfare, and that Quest Probe comic popped up in that.
Very nice.
I remember seeing a couple of ads for those games, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the adventure game isn't normally what you think of when it comes to comic book heroes, unless, like, that could maybe work for Batman or The Question or what have you, but it was still an interesting approach, and not everyone had an idea of what exactly a superhero game should be at the time. Then again, to be fair, I'm not sure anyone today has a straight idea of what a superhero game should be, so I'll just shut my mouth there.
Well, I mean, wasn't there a Spider-Man DOS game, though? There was one where he was in Mysterio's lair?
Yeah, a castle or something. I can't remember that.
In the mid 80s, I think that's when that came out, because I had the Commodore 64 version of that.
Oh, okay.
There was one where he was going up against Mysterio, and he was really small, and there was a famous production art picture of Spider-Man on the side of the life bar.
That's the one
in
I'm
certain
thinking
versions
of
the game. But he was running around in Mysterio's maze. But then there was also another game with Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's castle, and that was kind of a weird mix of genres there. But I can't remember the years on that one.
Now, this one might be 1990, so we might be jumping ahead a little.
Yeah, I do remember actually playing that Spider-Man DOS game in high school on some of the IBM PCs we had in the lab. Could never do anything with it, though. And I also remember seeing the ads for the Captain America Spider-Man game. It was called Doctor Doom's Revenge, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that's it.
I always was interested in trying that, but never had the ability to.
Yeah, at least the Commodore 64 version, I couldn't really get a handle on the controls all the way, but it was a really cool idea. They even had little comic book panel cutscenes in between whatever you were doing at the time.
Nice.
You'd have like hazard sections in some parts, then you would fight a supervillain in another part, so it kind of mixed things up a bit.
This Doctor Doom's Revenge game I'm watching now has one of the worst frame rates I've ever seen in the video game. And who the hell's Eduardo Lobo anyway?
Eduardo.
He was in the Spider-Man comics at the time.
Gray Gargoyle? What the funk?
That's the Thor villain.
Wow. Oddball. I give up.
Those are some obscure ones I've never even heard of.
Oddball started off mostly as a Hawkeye villain.
Oh.
He didn't really. He popped up in the mid '80s. I'm not sure. I think he popped up first in Hawkeye's miniseries.
My
Don't
God.
quote me on that.
James, how do you know all this? Like, I feel so inadequate here.
Wow. And the only thing I'm taking away from this is, wait, Hawkeye had villains?
Yeah, Hawkeye.
We will dunk on Hawkeye every chance we get, by the way.
Yeah, they pop up in other stuff later on, so people kind of forget they're Hawkeye villains. But
crazy.
Even that guy who's now known as Crossfire, he started off. I think he might have been in that miniseries too. I haven't read it yet. But I mean, Hawkeye has his own little corner of the Marvel universe. Whenever he popped up, either in other books or in his miniseries that were going on in the mid '80s.
Well, I do remember that I believe his arch rival was his brother, Trickshot, or something like that.
No, that's not his brother.
Darn it. My bad. I know crap. I know crap about
That's
shit.
Okay. Well, I mean, it might have been that in some of the other adaptations of it where they change things up. So you never know what's really in the comics and what isn't. So
this is true.
And plus, even in the comics, somebody will write a comic later on, and they'll what they call a retcon or retroactive continuity. They'll make a new story that changes stuff that happened in the past.
One more day.
You know, a lot of times they didn't really mess things up, but sometimes they just, it would just turn to a whole train wreck.
Yeah, I think what I just coughed was a perfect example of that train wreck. But, by the way, thank you, Song, for letting me know I'm easier to hear now, and welcome Brandon to the chat.
Hey, Brandon, what up?
Yeah, he mentions the Tick, which I believe we'll be covering in a bit.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Spoon! So, anyway, let's move up into the NES era. The first superhero game I remember seeing for the NES, there was two of them. There was X-Men and Superman. And
sucks. Next.
Good. Exactly. I mean, that was... What was up with that X-Men game anyway?
Sucks. Next. That's what I said.
Thank you. And why does Storm have nothing but like a... Well, James, you drew the artwork for that at one point.
The X-Men game had an interesting problem. It was a 2-player game, and you've got a limit of how many sprite tiles you can use at once on any of the older game systems. I mean, there's a limit for any of them, but back then it was more noticeable. So what they had to do was basically they drew a body that could work for everybody, a body that would work for every character, and then the heads would be different. So that's all that is, really. And they're all running around with the same body, and the way it's mapped out on Storm, and I didn't notice this until I was going to draw fan art of the characters, Storm basically doesn't have a shirt on.
Oh my. So what you're saying is that Chris Claremont was responsible for this game.
I
won't put it there, but somehow that got past the censors, but it got past everybody. Like I said, I didn't notice it. I think everybody was just paying attention to how bad the game was.
Yeah,
was annoyed at how you were forced to use an AI partner who he or she would just run into every trap imaginable, probably grab up a few good power-ups and items along the way before just getting killed. Then you had to go through the rest of it by yourself, and then later on you had to play the danger room sections for a bit for your character to pop back up in the roster.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't waste time with that game.
Yeah, it wouldn't be
LJN game too.
Yeah, that's the LJN game.
Yep. So Yeah. Then there was that Superman game, which was just weird.
Cute but weird.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the Statue of Liberty talks to you at the beginning.
And she's adorable.
Yep. But in Japan, the Famicom version actually used the John Williams theme from the movie.
Yeah,
Wow.
I can maybe see. Okay, that's kind of ironic that didn't make it over to the West, but licensing issues are really fucking weird. So I guess they had their reasons for that working out. But interesting little tidbit though is that a good chunk of the music is actually taken from another Kenko game, Famicom RPG, I believe, named Indra no Hikari or something like that.
Hadn't heard about that one.
That's
Yeah,
news to me. That's awesome.
it's a very obscure one, but yeah, the battle theme is like in that game is like the theme that plays whenever Clark becomes Superman. So, I do kind of like the idea of this game, but the execution is not excellent, of course, and the concept of attacking with one of the worst invisible hitboxes I've ever seen is just all 7 shades of jank.
Yeah.
Also, I remember some site having a picture that said Clark Kent blows his cover in front of Lois and Perry by jumping 20 feet into the air.
Pretty much.
Also Subway. For some reason, Superman has to take the subway in this game, and there are these realistic humanoid silhouettes that are all taller than him. What the I don't know. It's a fucking weird game. I never got really far into it, so.
Sounds like New Donk City before New Donk City in a way.
Yeah, you're not too far off there.
So
Not to mention you've got the problem of Superman taking damage from normal humans walking into him. That's kind of a him and RoboCop, I guess.
yeah.
Unless
games.
everyone has kryptonite suits and bullets, there's no reason for this crap.
Exactly. So let's move on to.
Hang on, Sam, did you want to opine on either of those games, by the way?
Yeah, that's a good point.
On Superman NES,
Or X-Man. Oh,
I
played that
mean,
one?
I've barely played either of those. I think I maybe saw a video of Superman NES, and I only saw screenshots of the X-Men LJN game. So I've got nothing on those two.
You're better
So-
I
off
envy
that way.
you.
No problem.
I really envy you.
Yeah, so do I.
It's like I said, man. Sucks. Next.
Exactly. So let's move on to something that doesn't suck as bad, but I still don't like it. Wolverine on the NES.
Well,
I
Jeff
didn't play that
Mullen
one
gave
either.
it a cool soundtrack.
Yeah, that and what's up with him only being able to use his claws for a certain amount of time?
I don't know,
Yeah,
but I
that-
don't think that's the only game that did that, and I just don't get how this... Like, it's bad enough that Superman gets nerfed in every game, but why can't Wolverine at least have part of his, well-known skill set that... I mean, I can understand why the healing factor gets nerfed, but why not the claws? Come on, just give us something.
Yeah, it's
It's-
like you
it's-
gotta punch everything.
Seems like there's a tendency to try and gamify as much as you can of it. In other words, just make it a pain in the butt for the player as much as they can. That's the only logical thing I can think of, because Wolverine really didn't have that much of a problem using his claws.
Yeah, exactly.
There were more creative ways of saying, okay, you don't want to use your claws on this. Like maybe if you had something that you didn't want, something in the game where you didn't want it to get damaged, and only having the claws out would damage it. I mean, there's a lot of creative ways they could have gotten around that, instead of, okay, we're going to punish you for having your claws out all the time. It's like, well, thanks a lot for...
Yeah.
I bought this game, and now I'm not having fun as Wolverine as much as I could have.
Or to quote Master Shake, yeah, thanks for nothing.
There you go.
How about you, Sam? You ever play this one?
I didn't even know this one existed.
Really? again,
Really, I didn't know there was a Wolverine NES game. I knew there was like, was it Wolverine Adamantium Rage on the 16-bit consoles, but I didn't know there was
Yeah.
an NES game.
again, I
There-
think you're pretty envied right now.
Yeah,
It's better than the X-Men game though.
for what that's worth, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
And also one thing that I've seen pop up in more recent years is as you see interviews from the game developers talk about this, OJN was primarily a toy company at the time. The main thing I knew them for were the Thundercat, the 1980s Thundercats figures.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
what the deal is, what I'm guessing, they didn't know how long it really took to make a video game. So they were probably getting rushed. That's probably why they were getting rushed all to heck to do these things. They didn't have that much time to work on Spider-Man and the X-Men, which we'll talk about later, and the results speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it seemed like they were contracting every other company to do the games for them because they didn't actually have a programming staff. They were just a distributor.
Right.
So, I mean, they had like Beam Software, Rare, and all the other ones doing that.
I believe Software Creations was a frequent name on these games.
I think you're right.
And given more time, they probably could have made better games, but they're at the whims of that parent company putting out the game, so they didn't have a choice.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly how the license factory worked. It was just all about brand recognition and fucks to quality for the most part.
Yeah. Now, on the same subject as Wolverine, Snarb just posted an interesting question. So he says, does anyone here think that Data East Werewolf the Last Warrior was meant to be a Wolverine game? Honestly, after a lot of the evidence he presented over on the Discord channel, I'd say yes. Because
Didn't one of the characters look almost exactly like, was it Magneto or Mr. Sinister?
The final boss looked a bit like Magneto, and he even tossed like steel girders at you. So
on top of that,
Yeah.
you don't even need to go that far. Just the regular ground troops you fight look like the mercenaries who work for the Hellfire Club.
And the first phase of the final boss is also basically a evil mirror of your character, so I've no doubt that was originally intended to be Sabretooth.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I'd love to see something pop up about that too. We've seen so many other things like this, like Sunman from Sunsoft.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
And we've seen so many things. We've seen so many things like this popping up in recent years. Hopefully something like that pops up with this game.
Yeah, here's hoping.
Yeah, I mean, it tracks because, of course, Data East would go on to make an actual Captain America game for the NES, and, of course, the arcade beat-em-up Captain America and the Avengers hence, so there has to be some connection. I just wish we can get more concrete evidence of what it might have been.
Agreed. Yeah. Speaking of the NES, though, we'll move on to a couple others here, unless Sam, you got anything to add?
Nope.
All right.
Cool.
Okay, we got to talk about it. Silver Surfer.
Sucks! Next!
It's just insanely hard.
Yeah,
Worth buying because there's a sound test cheat in it.
Yes.
Listen to that glorious music.
I think I only saw a full-page ad about this game in a gaming magazine. I think it was Video Games and Computer Entertainment, and that's all. That's the only thing that I've got on this game.
I rented it once. Never again. But there is that duck. That little rubber duck.
that will kill you, which, it gives me some bad flashbacks to Battletoads, but that's neither here nor there.
Clearly, that duck has the power cosmic.
Yes.
Is it supposed to be Howard?
No, it's just a rubber duck floating there, and it shoots at you.
Yeah.
There's
What?
I think in the Captain, I think it's the Captain Reptile stage. There's a part where you're underwater and there's a duck on the surface of the water, And one time I just said, I wonder if you die even if you crash into this duck, because everything else in the game kills you, even though the Silver Surfer is kind of known for being indestructible. So you float up there, and sure enough, if you come into contact with that duck, it will kill you.
I will copy the video here at 1 minute and 15 seconds. I will post it in the chat, and I will post that in our chat too, in case you wanted to see this when you get the chance.
And James, didn't you do artwork based on that duck once?
Yeah, I've got artwork of that.
Oh my god, I must see this. We must see this, dude.
Hold on. If you hear a bunch of loud clicking, that's my keyboard, because I'm gonna go to the part on my art site where that picture.
The duck cosmic. And Brandon mentioned C64 Howard the Duck. I know nothing about that.
Was it based on the Lucasfilm game? Or the Lucasfilm film?
It wouldn't surprise me if it was.
Because, I mean, it's a relatively obscure comic.
Yeah.
Trapped in a world he never made.
I hear it.
Steve Gerber was a pioneer of Marvel Comics, trying to get his original stuff published, but, like, it's still really obscure. So the fact that someone made a video game about it, it just kind of blows my mind, unless it's a tie-in to the Lucasfilm property.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. That seems to be about the time that Commodore 64 was really huge.
Well, Snarbu confirms that, yes, the C64 game is at least based on the movie.
Yep.
I have to ask, does the game at least have Leia Thompson's cleavage? Otherwise, it is lost. Yeah, I'm being a pervert right now. Anyway, Silver Surfer, yeah, I knew someone who actually claimed this game wasn't that bad, and, like, I don't know if they were just punking me or what, because it really is. I tried legitimately to get as far into it as I could, and I think I even beat a few of the levels. I will at least say I respect that the game has the Mega Man system of being able to select which order you want to do the stages in. That's at least pretty nominally cool. But your hitbox sucks. Even when powered up, your guns are pretty weak. And yeah, you don't even have a life bar or whatever. I mean, Silver Surfer, like, you think Superman gets a raw deal in his games. Silver might have it even worse here. It's just he gets punked by laughing pumpkins. That's just disgraceful. The only saving grace is Tim, and I forget if Jeff working this game too. One or both of the Fallen Brothers' music. Thus, this game is a prime example of the Fallen curse of a game having awesome music but shitty everything else. Even so, you only get, like, 2 overall themes for, like, 18 stages. I wish there was more music variety. I mean, what little we get is great, but, you know, even then, that just could be better, and this game's just a waste. Avoid it if you haven't played it already.
So, let's go ahead and cover the last 2 I can think of for the NES real quick before we move on. Let's see. That would be Captain America and the Punisher.
You mean just for Marvel, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what there was for DC on the NES other than Superman. Except for one, which I have not brought up yet.
Okay.
Wasn't going to say that yet.
Yeah, I think he's saving that one.
Okay. Just checking. I just thought
you really think I'd forget that one?
Okay, we'll save that for
later. Might be intentionally overlooking it.
Yes, for a reason. Anyway, but yes, Punisher and Captain America. I've played them both. I'm not overly thrilled with either. How about you, James?
The platformer game, it was, I don't know, it was mid. I'll put it like that. It wasn't bad to me, but it seemed like it could have used a bit more polish.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Sam, you ever play either of those?
I did not play either of those, but I mean, there was a Spider-Man game for the NES that came out in the later years of the NES that I did play. It was like Spider-Man Sinister Six
Yeah, Return of the Sinister
or something
Six.
like that.
I hear it's really
that's what it
terrible.
was.
Yeah, that one I was just going to intentionally skip because it sucks.
Yeah, fair.
It was very terrible because the hitboxes were just atrocious, which meant on the one hand that you could survive far longer than you really ought to have been able to survive, but at the same time, so could the bosses. Because they used the same exact hitbox system on the bosses that they did on you. And so you would think that you had just one hit left on them, and no, you probably had about 4 or 5, even though they just had 1 tick left on their health bar. It was frustrating as all get out. However, they did manage to get the webbing swinging decently working on the NES. I don't think you could have gotten it any better on the NES.
Say it was gonna be loud.
Unless you were like straight up Capcom and doing a Bionic Commando thing. I think they did about as good a job as the NES was capable of doing.
Which one were we talking about again? I got interrupted for a second.
Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six.
Oh,
Yeah.
that thing.
I'm trying to remember if I rented that back when it was new or not, and I just kind of pushed it out of my brain or something.
That's basically what I did with a lot of these games. At least tried to.
Yep. Yeah, I believe Sinister Six was developed by Bette Studio, who is one of the worst game developers ever that you've never heard of. So I'm not going to dignify its existence, if that's okay.
So,
But go ahead.
I was gonna say, unless anyone has anything to add, we should move on to
Nah.
All right.
Wait, well, I didn't get to talk about the Captain America and Punisher though.
This is true, but James, you have something on your mind?
Well, I was just gonna say, if any developer that can get the web swinging working on an NES, they can't be all that bad. So
They made the last action hero video game for the SNES and Genesis. They are all that bad, and I think just getting the web slinging right was a happy fluke. I'm convinced.
I don't defend it on any other level. I was just defending like the webbing in general because I don't think
Well,
I don't think that gives them a free pass by any means.
Well, a broken clock does get the time right at least twice a day.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, as for Captain America on the NES, barely played this one. Don't have much to say, except I think it's BS that the only other playable hero besides Cap is Hawkeye, and Iron Man and Vision are captive in this game. Like, was Hawkeye really that popular in the 90s, or did Data East just take a shine to his dumb headpiece? I don't know.
Well, Sega was too then.
I think there's a few possibilities for why that was. For one thing, if you want to keep the power levels of the characters you're playing similar, you pick Captain America and Hawkeye.
That's a good point, yes.
Another thing was, it seemed like they were kind of trying to push Hawkeye back in the mid and late 80s. Because he had the miniseries, he was leading the West Coast Avengers, and this was before Marvel went into their God bless Spider-Man and the X-Men and no one else era of the 90s, where let's try to promote every character we have whenever possible, instead of these two properties are good, everything else sucks, nothing else matters.
Right, they did do that.
So enough said about those. Let's
Punisher though.
Oh yeah, that's right. You didn't mention Punisher yet. Go ahead.
I played a little bit of it. It's very crude, like almost every Beam software game was back then. Like, wow, this just feels so amateurish. But that being said, it is one of Beam's less shitty NES games, if that's worth anything. I mean, it's no Nightshade. That's unquestionably their best one for the system, but This one, I guess, is an okay Dynamite Duke ripoff. Then again, Dynamite Duke isn't my favorite game ever, so I don't. It's passable. But it's not one I go out of my way to recommend.
Yeah, I actually watched Eugene stream that not too long ago.
Oh, what'd you think?
Well, I'd played it before, so I knew it was coming.
Not great.
No, still not great. I'd rather play Dynamite Duke.
Yeah, me too.
All right. So I guess then it's time to address the big caped and cowled elephant in the room.
Bum, 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 bum. Well, it's such a cool intro. Holy crap.
It is. There were actually, if I remember correctly, 2 Batman games on the NES. There was the one they've called Batman the Video Game, and then one based on Batman Returns by Konami.
Oh, don't forget Batman Return the Joker.
Ah, yes, 3. My bad.
Which is also by Sunsoft, but that one's a little bit of an odd case. I think I'm kind of hijacking the clockwise. I should really let James and Sam go first, so sorry about that.
All right, James, let us have it.
Oh.
It's clobbering.
Well, here we go. You put me on the spot on that one.
Yeah.
Well, you had 1989. The big phenomenon of the year was the Batman movie. I mean, before that, you really didn't see that many people walking around with superhero shirts unless you were helping out the Goonies. But
That's true.
I mean, it was the Batman symbol was everywhere in that video game. It is one of those rare, beautiful games where it goes beyond just being a licensed game and it's just a good game, period.
Mm-hmm.
The music was incredible. There are times where and the funny thing is, the person that we were hanging out with, Rex Warden, was there. It was me, Rex Warden, and one of our friends, and she had never heard the music from that game, and she didn't know that was coming from an NES. That's how good the music is.
Oh,
but I mean, just it's kind of Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden has that feel to it, and I mean, it ranks right up there with some of the best platformers on the system or any other system, really.
I can't argue with that at all. It's a fantastic game. How about the other ones?
No, I was gonna wait for somebody else to talk about Batman.
Oh,
we should, because everybody just needs to sit down and talk about how good this game is.
That's a good point. So let's move on to Sam.
Well, I mean, this was one of those games that you walk into Blockbuster and you try to rent it, and like all they have, like all the games behind the covers are gone for like weeks on end because that's how popular it was. And it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that in today's streaming era, but you couldn't find it on the shelves because of Batmania and the Burton film. You couldn't find it at Blockbuster, which was the only way to rent it if you couldn't buy it, and you were literally on a waiting list. And the reason why it was like so hard to get a hold of was because of its quality, and there literally had not been a good Batman game made until this one. And mechanically, it's probably the most ridiculously sound thing that you've ever seen on the NES. The triangle jump that you have to pull off in Strider, which also came out around the same time as this game, was just buggy as hell. And
So scarred by
even
that
the
moment.
Ninja Gaiden triangle jump, it was still really finicky to pull off and get it to working right. But with this game, with Batman, it was just smooth. You just jumped and bounced back and forth up the chimneys, and it felt natural because, Batman's supposed to be that agile. And this is before Batman the Animated Series invented the little bat grapnel to allow him to get to harder to reach places. So it was really an ingenious mechanic to get the character around in a platformer. The music was great. The only two things that I kind of question or puzzle over is, why is Batman using bladed shuriken, that triple shot, and where are some of the other rogues? Because, I mean, if you've got a video game, I know you're sticking to the Burton film, but, like, couldn't we get at least one or two other classic Batman rogues in here?
Well, I'll mention something when I go, unless there's anything else you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's just... But those are really my only two gripes. And they were my gripes from, like, the time I was 8 years old, which is when this game came out. So, everything else, like, the way that the character controlled and how smooth Batman actually played himself, it was really one of the very top tier games on the NES, just period, like James said.
And I agree with you about the rogue situation, and I kind of wonder if they were prevented from maybe using some of the other characters, but they said go ahead and slap random names on the rest of the enemies. If you look in the instruction manual, those other characters are named, but like that ninja that's smoking a cigarette at the bottom of a building, which is that's just ridiculously cool random thing to have in there. Look in the instructions, that's KG Beast, who looks nothing like that or acts nothing like that. And
I did not even... Yeah, that's a good point.
You've got Heatwave, who's a Flash villain, and I think they just said, well, go ahead and use these names just to give it something, but maybe hold off on these other games because we don't know what we're going to do for the next, don't use these characters because we might use them in another game, or they were probably already thinking of a sequel for the movie.
That could be.
Huh.
Oh. Mike, you want to throw your 2 cents in about Batman?
Yeah. Regarding the rogues, you guys might call BS, but apparently the stage 1 boss is supposed to be Killer Moth, and the stage 3 boss is supposed to be Electrocutioner. I know those are not Batman villains that ever come to the top of anyone's minds ever, but I guess they kind of count.
That's what I mean. They, Killer Moth one, I can see that possibly being really the whole game. And I think I thought about this after Rusty Shackles drew that print he did for the game. Sometimes I think it would have been cool if there was a Batman anime based just on the game. And you could see like that, you could see like that mechanized version of Killer Moth and Heatwave with the armor, even if that's who they were originally supposed to be, which they probably weren't. They just said, okay, what name can we put on this? Killer Moth kind of fits, but most of the others, they're random, but they're still cool looking.
Yeah, Rex said you'll get Firebug and like it. Very upset villain Firebug is apparently supposed to be the penultimate boss, the guy that you fight before Joker.
That was crazy.
And fun fact, it was originally supposed to just be the final boss. In the finished version of the game, you do actually get to fight Joker, who has the only attack that does more than one piece of damage, and he is quite a tough fight. But in the prototype of the game, Firebug's just the finale, and it ends... It's a different ending where, Batman just slinks up behind Joker and while he says, like, is it done? And then he turns around like, oh no! And then it ends with Batman just socking him in the jaw, and which is pretty funny, but, in the finished version, you do actually fight Joker, and unlike the movie where, like, Joker falls to his death
and like Batman caused it, but it was also a little bit a slight accident in a way. No, in the NES version, no ambiguity. Batman just fucking throws Joker off 100%, just fucking murders him. So, you know, if that's what inspired Zack Snyder to just totally fucking ruin the character, then I guess this game never should have been made. No, I'm just kidding. As far as the actual, you know, game itself, I'm not sure I could really add much to what James and Sam already said. It is fantastic. The aesthetics, both graphics and sound, are amazing. The gameplay is pretty solid, even though I don't know why Batman has a gun, but again, Snyder, oh well. But it does get quite hard later. Stage 3 has these large hopping assholes that I hate a lot, and yeah, Stage 4 and the finale are not nice. The finale especially has a lot of gears that can shred away your life, and you gotta be really good with the wall jumping by that point. But I am thankful that Sunsoft gave us unlimited continues on this one, because that was not something that they were always kind about in their other games. So this game is beatable, it just comes down to patience, but yeah, again, I can't really add much else. It's one of the best action games on the NES, licensed or otherwise. I put it up there along with the likes of, like, you know, Shatterhand and Power Blade as far as those types of games go. So, yeah.
Great comparisons, too.
Hey, I finished, man.
I just wanted to see how you react.
Dinguses.
Anyway, as far as me and Batman go, I remember that the year that game came out, I was, I think, 15 in high school, and everyone was talking about it. Anyone who had a copy of the game, it's like they just had like 20 new best friends. And I know I rented it once, and I played it a couple other times. A friend of mine had it, and it was just, you know, incredible. But did any of you ever see the prototype besides Mike?
I did not.
I haven't tried out the prototype yet.
The cutscenes are interesting. Like, at one point at the beginning, Batman's threatening some goon, and he's like, "Where is Vicky Vale?" "She's in Gotham City." And then Batman's like, "Gotham City?" Like he's never heard of the place. And then, of course, what he said about the you know, Joker just getting socked in the jaw. Yeah.
That's pretty great, yeah.
But, yeah, that was a game that I made it a point to get at one point, and then later on I ended up getting the Famicom version too, which actually switches the track 1 and track 2 of the music on stage 1 and stage 2.
Right. That's
weird.
Very strange. Because the stage 1 music that we know really does feel like stage 1 music. Heck, it even reprises in the final stage. It's just so cool. I mean, that second stage track is pretty neat too, but it almost sounds more like surfer music. It doesn't exactly make for a likely first stage track, in my opinion. Maybe I'm just biased. I don't know. It's a strange decision.
No, I can agree with you on that, and I'm glad that Sunsoft changed it when they brought it out over here.
Bingo.
Same here, because I tried the Japanese PC Engine Batman game, and it kind of shocked me how long it took for Streets of Desolation, that first background music track, to pop up.
It did, though. It does sound
it's
good.
in there, but it takes a while. And yeah, it sounds great in that.
So, moving on with Batman, though, then, of course, we have the Sunsoft sequel, which would have been, what, Revenge of the Joker, right? Or was it Return?
Well, Revenge of the Joker on the 16-bit versions, but it was known as Return of the Joker on the NES because, I guess, Nintendo protested about revenge in the title or some bullshit like that. And the SNES version, I believe, was unreleased anyway, so yeah.
Now, I actually interviewed David Siller of Sunsoft back when I was writing Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman in 2014.
Cool.
And he had a lot of interesting things to say about that game, like why Batman could fly on a shooter stage. And he said something along the lines of how it was an experimental time for Batman, and they had freedom to do things they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. But in all honesty, the game seems to me like a glorified tech demo. So what do you think, James?
I have not played that version yet. So I don't have anything to say.
So not even about the NES game?
Oh, I mean, I haven't played the NES game. I hate talking about stuff that wasn't released on here because I don't know what the limitations are. But that SNES game, I almost thought that was like some reason it made me think it was just a ROM hack.
I can see why. Actually,
has anybody else played that?
I think I played the prototype briefly.
I did. It just feels really off.
Yeah.
Although at least it's not the other Batman prototype, which I forget who was even making it, but there's this SNES prototype of what would have been, I believe, a Western-made Batman beat 'em up that just feels really stiff and off, and like the only enemy they programmed in there was some sort of generic biker thug. The ROM title of that really, really, really early prototype is called Really Shitty Batman in most versions that I know about. I don't know if any of you guys know about that one. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I don't actually. How about you, Sam?
Is that the one that was also called Batman 3?
No, Batman 3, I believe, was actually the Japanese title of the Batman Returns game that was on the Konami one. That's very confusing because, like, Return of the Joker is like a not based on anything original sequel to the Batman NES game, which was based on the first movie. But then there was actually another game based on the second actual movie, Batman Returns, but that was by Konami and not Sunsoft. So that's kind of a mental cluster there. It's and like not helping is that Return/Revenge got two versions across two systems, and the third prototype version didn't come out, so it's weird.
I got those games mixed up because I was thinking about that one you were talking about with Batman and the generic bikers in it.
Right. I want to say that was the infamous Software Creations that was going to make that one, but I don't remember. I'm going to have to look this up.
I've never seen any specifics about where that came from. It was just it was probably one of the first WTF ROMs that I ran into while looking for stuff when I was getting into emulation.
I found Really Shitty Batman on YouTube, and yes, it was going to be Software Creations.
Lovely. How about you, Sam? Any thoughts on Return of the Joker?
I mean, I knew that it came out when I was younger, but I never actually got a chance to play it until much, much later on emulation, and I think I played probably the first stage or two of it, and I'm like, it was just not for me.
Yeah.
I'd set it down.
I can understand why, actually. Mike, anything else to add about Return of the Joker?
Yeah, I have actually played this one in full, and I don't think it's a bad game, but compared to the prior NES Sunsoft Batman title, something about this one just misses the mark somehow. Like, I don't know, Batman's sprite is too large, too clunky. Why does he not throw a single punch? He's entirely using a wrist-mounted gun in this one for some reason. That even has 4 different weapons that he can arm for besides the default. It really feels like this one was intended to be something else that just got the Batman license slapped on it after the fact. I also remember...
Before you go on, at least according to David Siller, that wasn't the case. It was just Batman being in a very experimental phase at the time. Personally, I think they were patterning him after Azrael.
That might be. When was Nightfall again?
93.
this would have been before that, or
Not by much.
yeah, that's true.
Don't
that's
forget
true.
they have to plan this stuff out months in advance. So there's a weird possibility that there's some truth to what you're saying.
And I mean, they had introduced John Paul Valley in the comics probably 2 years beforehand, because there was this weird back and forth with DC and Marvel at the time, and Marvel had sort of created their answer to Batman in Moon Knight, and Moon Knight was just taking off. There was that whole bit with the Secret Empire, and when Spider-Man was on the Avengers, and Moon Knight was a huge part of that. And so John Paul Valley was sort of DC's answer to Moon Knight.
That makes a lot of sense from what little I know of him.
So, well, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's entirely possible that, like, there was stuff going on behind the scenes and licensing stuff happening, and I mean, but also it's curious that David Siller is just like, it's just really experimental gameplay with Batman. I can see that totally happening too.
Yeah, the 90s in general seemed like a really odd time for comics, but I couldn't tell you much about it exactly. All I can say about
comics, Mike.
Real comics, TM, as I have thus patterned. Oh, that's its whole thing. That's its own whole thing. I don't want to get into it unless time allows. But yeah, Revenge of the Joker. I don't know. I found it kind of frustrating at points. Like Stage 3 is the obligatory ice level where your movement kind of sucks. And then there are these assholes who just shoot tornadoes at you that are usually near pits that they knock you into. It's just textbook, fuck you, action platformer game design 101. And the first Batman game definitely turned up the heat, but it mostly felt fair. This one, I don't know. It looks and sounds nice, I will give it that. But the less said about the extremely fucking terrible and gaudy Genesis port, the better.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeesh.
Well, let's move on to the last Batman NES game. And while you guys are discussing it, I need to take a quick break. So, by all means, go ahead and talk about yourself. This is Batman Returns by Konami. James, go ahead.
Yep. Well, I'll start this off by saying I haven't played that version either. When that happened, I was playing the SNES version, so so Sam and Mike, you guys go ahead and talk about it.
I mean, I didn't realize that Batman 3 was the Batman Returns NES game. So I guess I have played it, but I mean, I played it maybe about 4 or 5 minutes tops, and it was one of those things where it was like, oh, he's got a cool new move where he can like take two people and bash their heads together. All right. And then the novelty of that wore off, and I was like, this is a really bad brawler. Really, really bad brawler. The Batman Returns game that I played the most of was the Game Gear game. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
It was actually pretty good.
I mean, do we want to skip forward to the Game Gear version, or?
Not yet.
That's on the list.
Yeah,
because because I could probably put a list up. I don't know if it's on there.
It is on the list, but it's like further. It's after the NES, the Super NES game. So.
Okay.
Well, I have played the Batman Returns NES to the end, as I recall, and it's okay. It does feel kind of slow, though. Like, the problem with the NES game is that there was also a SNES Batman Returns, also made by Konami, and it felt like their manpower was more invested in the SNES version. The NES version, while it's cromulent enough as a beat 'em up, but and it's got good music. I will give it that, but the SNES one just feels more relatively fluid. I mean, it was arguably aping more from Final Fight, but that one worked pretty well. The NES Returns, yeah, I just remember that I abused Batman's slide kick a lot in this one. I don't really know much about how I really beat it. Like, again, where it was at was the SNES one. The NES one just kind of felt like an afterthought, and I don't know exactly why it was made. Maybe Konami felt like they wanted to throw a bone to people who by like 93 or so when this game came out that they still did not have an SNES for whatever reason, but I guess that was an increasingly limited demographic at the time. So yeah, the NES one just kind of comes off as a bit of an antiquated anomaly next to its bigger brother, in my opinion.
Well, I can't argue with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've actually owned the cartridge a couple of times, and I never kept it, so that should tell you something.
Yep.
So, I'd say with that, let's move on to some of the 16-bit superhero games. We'll kind of cover those fairly quick, and after that, I think we should turn our attention in a different direction. But the first one that comes to mind for me is the Batman for Genesis.
Yes.
Whoever was here at the opening of the stream would have heard the Streets of Gotham theme playing while we were waiting for the stream to start. So, James?
One of the big things that I remember, the fact that we didn't know we were going to get this game in the United States when we first saw pictures of it in EGM.
Yes. I remember
Electronic Gaming Monthly. They were showing import pictures from the Mega Drive version, and even in the magazine they were saying, why aren't we getting this game? And it took us a while, but we got it, and it turned out to be a pretty good game. Trying to think I don't know if I like the NES version more. The NES version seems more, I guess, polished, but the Genesis version, that turned out really good too. You've got it seems more beat 'em up than platforming, but it's still, I'm trying to think of a way to put it. It's almost like a Strider NES and arcade situation, except for the fact that the Genesis, both versions of Batman are really, really playable.
Yeah. You know what that one actually reminded me of a bit, though? Was Revenge of Shinobi.
Revenge of Shinobi. I remember you said that on the OPCFG.
Yeah.
So that grappling.
It seemed like they really took a few cues from it.
Yeah. All for the better, I say. So, how about you, Sam? Anything to say about Batman Genesis?
This is another one of those and I'm probably the odd man out here, but I've hardly even touched this one. I think I've only seen screenshots, and it was one of those almost mythical games that I never actually managed to get my hands on enough to play. I had a friend named Eric who had a Genesis, and he was the one that introduced me to a lot of different Genesis games. But this was one that he didn't have in his library because he couldn't get a hold of it. And since I didn't have a Genesis myself, I didn't own it. I didn't rent it. So I've got nothing as far as that's concerned.
You bring up a great point, because I only had a chance to rent it back when it was new. I didn't get a chance to buy it.
Yeah, see,
I mean, I've never even seen a cartridge like in real life, even at like a secondhand store.
I mean, actually own this game.
I mean, I know it exists. I'm just saying it's still like uncommon in terms of like secondhand stores. I don't see it. It's either like one of those things that is so popular that it doesn't last very long on the secondhand shelves, or it, they didn't have a very large print run. Or maybe I don't know, but I've not been able to get my hands on that.
It is fairly in demand these days for a Genesis game.
Of course it is. Jesus Christ.
So, Mike, don't mince words. Tell us how you really feel.
Thank you, Kirk. This game's great. I like it a lot. I almost want to say I like it more than the NES game, but that doesn't seem entirely fair since, like you said, they're like James said, they're both doing different things, and but what this one does, even if it is a little bit like, somewhat less intense Revenge of Shinobi, it does still have quite good action, if I do say so, but I will say where this game excels vis-a-vis the NES version is that it is a lot more accurate to the film. Like, it just follows the events of the film, like, note for note. Like, it starts out in the streets, Batman doing his thing, then it goes to Axis Chemicals, and Batman fights off Jack Napier's goons, and then he faces Jack at the end, where he just goes down in one hit and falls into the chemicals. Then they go to the museum, where thankfully we don't have that Prince theme playing. The boss of the museum is actually the big burly guy with the boom box, which is just fucking great. I love it. And the crazy swordsman in the movie is also a boss in this game. And it also has two shoot 'em up sequences that are actually very good. One in the Batmobile and the other in the Batwing. If the game was just entirely that, I think it would have worked as well. But I guess it's kind of like Vice Project Doom in that sense. The Batman Genesis game is like a non-shitty version of the Atari Batman game, which, sorry to say, I don't like that one very much, despite how film accurate it is. This one is accurate, and it actually plays pretty damn well. So,
just to clarify, Mike, you're speaking about the Atari arcade game, right?
Yeah, the Atari arcade. Not. There was no Batman on any Atari home console, I think. But and also quite good graphics. This one, phenomenal fucking soundtrack. I especially love the Stage 3 music to the Flugelheim Museum. That one's just too fucking cool. Definitely track this one down somehow if you haven't played it before, because I think it gets a little bit overshadowed by the NES game, and the NES game certainly deserves all the accolades coming to it, but I don't think that should override this one's existence either. So
that's true.
Yeah. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I actually got the game as a birthday present the year it came out.
Nice.
And I had it for some time until, like an idiot, I traded it in. Yeah, it was a few years down the line. So I later had to go ahead and get it back, which luckily I did that for the prices started to skyrocket. Loose cartridge only, though. But then a few years later, I actually had the opportunity to get the Mega Drive version of the game. Again, just a loose cartridge, but still. So I figured, what the hell, why not? And there are a couple of minor differences between the two, but nothing really noteworthy. So either way, good game.
Yeah.
So
now, did we want to mention either the Game Boy or TurboGrafx 16 Sunsoft Batman?
Yeah, we can mention that one.
Okay.
It actually kind of reminds me of the Doraemon game, the first one that came out for it, or Crater Maze it was called in the U.S.
Yeah, that's the one I've played the least. Unfortunately, compared to the other three Sunsoft Batman, that one gets kind of redundant for me, but hey, the music's cool at least.
What do you think, James?
Yeah, I had the same opinion as Mike. The music in it is amazing, and in fact, I kind of kept playing more and more. Like I said, I wanted to hear "Streets of Desolation," that first track from the NES game, and it doesn't disappoint. So, if you're curious, even if you just want to hunt down the music on YouTube, check it out because it's great. But as far as the action, it's different, and I appreciate they're trying to do something different. But I don't like it as much as the NES or Genesis versions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the weakest.
Yeah.
And Sam, I know you're not really big into imports, but have you ever even seen this one?
Never.
Mike, do your thing.
I mean, I didn't play a whole lot of TurboGrafx games at all because those were as rare as owl's teeth in my neck of the woods.
Yeah, this would have been even rarer since
So
it only came out in
I
Japan.
think I maybe, yeah, never seen it.
Yeah, it's not bad, but it's definitely not up to the level of the other two.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, I don't have much more to say about the TG16 version besides the brief blurb I already did, but I don't want to overlook that there was a fourth Sunsoft game based on the 1989 movie, and this one was for the Game Boy. Although I know the Game Boy isn't usually Rob's forte, so I don't know how much we didn't want to go into this one.
I've played it a little bit, the game in question, but not too much. So if you want to talk about it for a couple minutes, go ahead.
I mean, only if either of you have anything else to say about it. Otherwise, I'll just withdraw.
What are you guys? James, Sam?
My question is, I mean, is this the one where Batman was wandering around with a gun for the entire game?
Yes. Once again, I guess Snyder has played these games a lot, so oops. But that is indeed the one. He is even gunnier than he was in any of the other versions. I mean, at least in Return of the Joker, it was at least a wrist-mounted gun like his gadgets usually are. But no, he just has a straight-up pistol in this one. I got nothing. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, in that case, then you had Batman Returns. It came out for numerous consoles. We already talked about the NES one, but I know you guys mentioned the Super NES one as well, which I enjoyed.
I did, yes.
But I absolutely hate the Genesis game.
I know Snarboo's a fan of the Genesis game.
Yes,
so...
you mentioned that in the chat earlier. I cannot stand that game. It is just, ugh. How about any of you?
I've never played the Genesis Batman Returns. The one that I spent the most time with was the Game Gear.
Well, I envy you in that regard. James?
I had the Sega CD version of it.
Wow.
And I wanted to like that so very, very much, but I couldn't. It looks great. There were some parts of it that were good, but it's also one of those games that made me dread whenever someone said that there's going to be a Batmobile section in a game, because it got really, really irritating to play through that. It's one of those really tough. I forgot what studio did that for Sega, but it's got that. It's tough. It's a good looking game, but it's a toughness that I don't enjoy in a platformer.
Exactly.
I don't know how else to put it.
Well, that sounds good to me, because I understand exactly where you're coming from there. Now, the Game Gear game Sam keeps mentioning, that was actually also released for the Master System, too. And
Was it the same game?
same game. The only thing that changed was the Master System version was more zoomed out. 'Cause I did.
So you could see more of the screen at once, or okay.
Yeah, same case for Master of Darkness,
Exactly.
which is not a Batman game, but one I like quite a bit. So.
It's a good game, that's why. But
Yeah.
I did like that one for the most part. I've only played it here and there, but what I played of it, I like. So, how about you, James?
That's one of those versions I haven't had a chance to play, but the more I hear you guys talk about it, the more I feel like I have to try it, because that sounds interesting.
Oh, definitely should. You want to elaborate any more on this one, Sam?
Well, I mean, it's just rare to have a superhero game where you have access to all of the superhero's equipment from the starting line and you never lose it. And it's all built into the mechanics in a really well thought out way. Like you have Batman's batarangs to begin with, and they function like boomerangs. And you can choose to alter the range they fly, and they'll do more damage if they are closer to you versus if you have more range. You also have access to the bat grapple. You can glide by holding down the jump button once you're in air. You can do a whole lot of stuff that Batman can do just from jump. And the game is pretty mechanically solid, too. It's not quite on the level of the NES game, but it's certainly more so than a lot of Batman games and Batman platformers were. It's probably like my number 2 favorite Batman game, to be perfectly honest, just because of that. Now, what I will say where it's failing is, unfortunately, is that it has abysmal level design. Just horrific. The combat engine is great, but like you can tell that they spent most of their time trying to get that working. The level design was just uninspired to me. But graphically, the visuals really recall Burton's films. But they needed to hire a better level designer.
I can't argue with that. Mike, do you have anything to add about this at all?
The Game Gear and SMS one, sadly, no. I can really only talk more about the SNES Batman Returns.
Well.
That's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, while a Brazen Final Fight ripoff is still a pretty damn good beat 'em up. I mean, unfortunately, there's no co-op unless, like, you want it to be like Red Batman or whatever.
The Batmans are an R.
Maybe we should talk about the later Superman arcade game, but yeah, it's quite a good one for the most part. It's very accurate to the film. Like, the tattooed strongman is a boss, aka the guy that in the movie Batman strapped a bomb to and punched down a well. Batman Returns was a fucking bizarre film. Like, holy shit. And
it had McDonald's tie-ins for Happy Meals.
That too, yes, for how irascibly dark it is. Because, like, the Penguin goes full-on, like, Ramses and wants to kill the firstborns of everyone in Gotham for reasons. It's been too long since I've seen it. My memory's kind of hazy. But the game is quite good for what it is, but it's pretty damn hard. Like, I don't know if I just lost my mojo or what, but last time I played it, I just got fucking wiped by Catwoman. She's the stage 3 boss, 3 out of 7, and I just could not beat her until I had spent, like, nearly all my credits, so, it can be pretty tough, but, it's a pretty good one. I like it.
It's one of my favorite single player beat 'em ups.
Oh yes.
System. Easily. I mean, you know how I feel about SNES Final Fight.
Yeah.
So
it's bad.
Rush job and a half.
I mean, so I don't blame Capcom for it, but Batman Returns, they did a great job on that. Like Mike said, they've got so many of the elements of the movie in there that it just seems like they worked with the people making the movie, which is weird because I heard that the team that was working on the Genesis version were supposedly working with the people who made the movie, and it seems backwards almost because the Konami version almost seems more faithful in some ways.
Also, I see BGM and Oscillo is here. Afraid me of mispronouncing that, but welcome. Good to see you.
Hey there.
All right. All right.
Oh, and good night to Brandon Kilgore.
Yeah, if we don't see you again, we'll catch you later.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we spent plenty of time on Batman, but we do have one more couple of games to cover. And these would be some of the best Batman games, I think. Well, the Genesis game, well, we'll just get into it. The Adventures of Batman and Robin. So, James, any thoughts on the Genesis or Super NES version?
I played the SNES version quite a bit when I rented it. Never was able to snag a copy for myself. Only got to play a little bit of the Genesis version, and that is tough.
Yes.
That is $2 steak tough. But what they were able to pull off on that system was amazing.
Also, yes.
I don't know how else to put it.
It's like at that point, the developers, whoever made it, they knew the Genesis pretty much inside and out.
Yeah, on a scientific level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, how about you, Sam?
I mean, the thing about that game is just how ridiculously faithful it was to the TV show, just in terms of looks and also overall tone. They nailed it. They just absolutely, completely nailed it. I mean, on both of those releases. Now, one of them is better than the other, honestly, but even so, the fact that they were able to get the look of the TV show so completely accurate was a testament to the people that were making the game. Because I mean, you look at something like SWAT Cats on the SNES, and it didn't look anything like the show at all. Or Pirates of Dark Water, which again, that's one of my all-time favorite beat-em-ups on the SNES, but it didn't look anything like the show. Here, you've got these two games, and they look like they literally stepped out of the Timverse.
I can't argue with that, especially the Super NES one. That in particular just really got me.
Yeah, that's the one that hits me the most, because I mean they've even got the color palette of the show down. But I think that's more because the SNES, that system's own color palette kind of lends to that style better. I think with the Genesis version, they were taking what they had and trying to hit the show with the colors they could use, and in their own way, they did an amazing job there.
Yeah, I can't argue with that either. Mike, you have anything to say about these two?
Yeah, I'll probably drop the hottest take for the night. I'm actually not the biggest fan of the SNES version. I like the Genesis version quite a bit more.
Judas.
Yeah, geez, of course I say that. I mean, I respect that the SNES version is a lot more accurate to the show, like almost note perfect in tone, aesthetics, and even in characterization. But it moves kind of slow for me, to be honest. Like, the way Batman's running, you'd think he'd move like 1.5 times the speed that he does. And, I just have nitpicks of the game all over. Like, the whole roller coaster bit, where you have to stay on the roller coaster for as long as you can, then fight Joker at the end of it. This whole scene lasts for, like, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. The Joker can very easily knock you off it, and there's no checkpoints. If you fall off, you gotta start the whole damn thing over again. And this is just the first stage. Like, it has some neat concepts here and there. Like, the fourth stage has you pursue fighting Catwoman, like, all throughout the streets and abandoned buildings of Gotham, and that's a pretty neat concept, but I don't know, something about the controls of this one kind of feels stiff, and I did I think I had to use extensive passwords, but I did beat it once, and I must say, I call this a skill issue if you must, but the fucking Riddler's chessboard gauntlet, I think, is even harder than anything on the Genesis version. I'm sorry, that's just how it works for me. Not that the Genesis game is not difficult, because goddammit, it is. But, I don't know. I just think I vibe with it better. Like, it's almost more Contra-esque in its design, and sure, it can be high energy, and it does require some good reflexes to get by, but I just like how it controls better. It feels more fluid, and I like its overall pacing than the SNES game more. It's not as accurate to the show's tone, because it has this bizarre, almost unfitting, driving industrial soundtrack by Jesper Kyd, who's a musician I like quite a bit. But I just really, really like the aesthetics for this one. They went all out, and it is very cool. It's not a perfect game, but I just really dig its style. And also, two-player co-op with Batman and Robin is certainly a huge bonus, whereas that wasn't a thing on the SNES version either. I mean, it's not perfect. The second stage goes on way too long with this really slow shoot-'em-up sequence that lasts at least 10 minutes, maybe like 15. And the third stage gets kind of bullshit at times, like that giant hopping gnome boss or whatever. And they kind of clearly run out of time and budget in the final stage, which kind of doesn't feel as creative as the first three. But, I don't know, I just like it more than the SNES one. I know that seems wrong, but I just do. I'm sorry.
Wow. Well, here's the thing about the Super NES. You know why Batman runs like that?
Why is that?
It's very windy in Gotham.
Well, I thought it was based on New York, not Chicago, the Windy City.
Nope, it's just very windy there. There's like all sorts of wind blowing all the time, so he has to constantly run against the wind because it's always facing him. It's never coming from the back.
Yeah, so that's why he runs at Marceau speed.
Exactly.
Oh, lordy, nerds. And yes, Matt Furness is a great musician, but yeah.
I'll say, as far as the two games go, I do prefer the Super NES one. I never finished it, but I did manage to get past the Riddler's bit, and that was hell. And
yeah, so you agree with me that part sucks, yes. At least.
But
that's painful.
I could never beat Clayface, though. He basically stopped me dead.
Drat. That's the final stage, too.
Yeah. The other part of the game that actually kind of irritates me is the driving scene where you're chasing Two-Face.
Yeah, stage 5, that one kind of sucked, too, honestly.
But, you know, other than that, I still think it's perfectly good, and I echo everything Sam said about that. The Genesis game I never really got into because it is just way too damn hard.
I just find the SNES one harder. What's wrong with me?
Yeah, you do you.
Oh, if you say so.
But
I don't think there's it's one of those cases. I don't think there's a wrong answer with this game. I mean, they're both games have some great things going for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I prefer the Genesis Adventures of Batman and Robin, and I prefer the SNES Aladdin. So, you know, it is what it is.
Aladdin too. So,
right on. That's the only correct answer, and I don't want to start that war. Yeah, that's something people get really fervent about on, like, Discord servers for some reason. I don't get it.
90s kids.
Yeah, only 90s kids will get this one. Jesus.
But, you know, we're not doing Disney yet.
Nope.
So,
I'll shut up.
Let's give the Cape Crusader a break then and move on to the Man of Steel. So, there was a Genesis Superman game, which I had such high hopes for after playing the Genesis Batman game, and they dropped the ball with it. They completely dropped the ball, which, you know, it actually had most of Superman's actual rogues gallery in it, but...
Yeah, I think the Tinker and Metallo were in it for start. Oh, Toyman! Sorry, Tinker was Spider-Man.
But, you know, it just... it was way too hard because you'd look at Superman funny and he'd die.
Yeah.
So the only reason I was ever able to go through it was to actually use Game Genie codes. And admittedly, if it hadn't been so punishingly difficult, it would be a really cool game. But no, it just, they really, really overbalanced it. So, that said,
doesn't this one have that weird fluke where like you can actually lock yourself out of being able to finish the game if you don't pick up the right powers or something like that? That's my only vague memory of this game.
well, you had to have certain powers to go ahead and get through walls and fences and stuff. So usually you wouldn't be stuck. You could backtrack for them, but then again, you might that might be an issue. You can always charge up Superman's punch and let fly with a super haymaker. So, James, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I tried to get into this game and I couldn't. I just tapped out pretty early. Thankfully, it wasn't one where I rented it and played it, because if I'd have paid money trying to play it, I'd have been even more irritated. But it's just kind of ridiculous how easy it is for Superman to die in this game.
Yeah, it is.
And it, like you said, hearing that there were people besides Lex Luthor showing up in it, I wanted to see it and never got a chance to see it because everything in this is trying to kill Superman constantly at every moment of at any turn, and it's not easy. I mean, it's not that easy to survive in it. And I just ended up moving on to something else.
Yeah, I held on to my copy for years and then finally got a Game Genie and said, screw it. Went through it and it's like, well, I'm done. This is going for sale. But if I remember correctly, Brainiac's the final boss.
He is, yes.
Yeah. So, Sam, you said you didn't know too much about it, but anything else you might have heard or want to talk about it?
I mean, I played a little bit of it on emulation, but I gave up pretty early myself. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot of redeeming qualities to pursue this game very much.
No. Yeah. Sad. How about you, Mike?
Banger goddamn soundtrack. Otherwise, crap. Total fallen curse on this one, and I don't know what the fuck happened with Sunsoft after their NES days, but 16-bit era was kind of rough for them. Like, they just kind of, except for Batman Genesis, like, after that one, they just kind of fell off for some reason. I don't know what happened and how this game became as much of a frustrating mess as it did. It definitely had potential, and I believe there's actually is or has even finished a ROM hack in the works or is done that totally rebalances this one to be much less frustrating. I would at least like to give that a shot and see if it makes it any more redeemable, but I mean, it's just a shame. It's just such wasted potential with the aesthetics and accuracy we got that it's just kind of crap.
Yep. But, you know, I know what happened to Sunsoft.
What's that?
What happened was Blaster Master 2, and that just cursed them.
Nuts.
How do you follow up one of the best NES games ever made with that pile of crap?
I'm licensing it to the wrong development studio.
Pretty much. Should have handled that in-house. So, let's move on then, and, you know, there were a few brawlers released for these 16-bit consoles, too. You have The Death and Return of Superman, and...
Sucks.
Yes. Then you have
Go
Maximum Carnage and Separation Anxiety, in which I've always said any game where Spider-Man and Venom can be beat up by a Girl Scout is not for me. So, anyone have any thoughts on these games in particular besides Mike's sucks for Death and Return of Superman? How about you, James?
I mean, he's not wrong.
No, he's not.
I'm not. No.
But I mean, like these were the adaptations of comic book crossovers that were just massive, and it's kind of hilarious to see just how badly the adaptations went in video game form.
Yeah.
Because you can't get much bigger than the Death and Return of Superman in the early 90s. And this is like the most visible Superman has been since the 70s movie. And so like, oh, let's put out a video game. And they put this out?
Yep.
I mean, what? How? How do you... I'm just reminded of like, in a completely different context, like Mark Waid going absolutely livid about the X-Men comic that they included in TV Guide, where they just like included a tie-in to one of the long soap opera storylines in X-Men instead of, giving a done-in-one issue. And he was just absolutely livid. He's like, this is the TV Guide. This dwarfs any kind of circulation that any comic book has ever had. And this video game, the Death and Return of Superman, is the exact same thing for video games and that crossover. And he's like, they blew it. He's like, fire them all. We're dying here. Like, and that's how I feel about the Death and Return of Superman video game, because like you could have done so much with that. The Return of Superman was a fantastic storyline, introduced some characters that are still around today, but this game is just absolutely unplayable.
So on the Marvel side, what about Maximum Carnage or Separation Anxiety?
For me,
Yeah.
I mean, I picked up Maximum Carnage, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to play this, and I got maybe to the end of the first level, and I was like, nope, this is not for me. And then, I'll be honest with you, I picked up Maximum Carnage because I thought it was 2-player. I rented it with a friend, and it turned out to be a 1-player game, and we're like, okay, well, no, we're not gonna sit here and play this. Next time, we're like, oh, we should have gotten Separation Anxiety, so we got Separation Anxiety. It was worse than Maximum Carnage.
Oh,
I mean, by a long shot, and it was just dreadful. And we didn't even get through the first level, and we're like, we're not doing this. We set it down, and we went off and did something else. But it was, again, these were like the same kind of thing. They were the most visible that Spider-Man had been in years because of one thing or another, and they just dropped the ball.
Yep. Hey, James, how about you? Any thoughts?
Okay, well, I'll start with the Death and Return of Superman, and I think part of the problem, especially if you have to do a beat 'em up, you're using a lot of sprite tiles, and one of the things that game is infamous for are you see the same characters over and over and over and over and over. There's very little variation, and part of the problem is if you don't have enough RAM space or you don't know how to utilize it correctly, like companies like Konami did, Capcom, Evangelico, with the Brawl Brothers series. They found a way to fit enough enemies into that RAM so that you're not just fighting two guys over and over again for an entire stage. And once you get past that, playing the game by itself, it just doesn't feel that good. I mean, we weren't. What year did that game come out? I'm having trouble remembering that. Because
Let's say like 94 or something around
Yeah,
there.
something like that.
yeah, because it seemed like people were still trying to get a grasp on that Capcom style beat 'em up. after Final Fight came along. In the United States, it would have been around 1990 when it hit. It takes people a while to get used to making games in a certain style. It takes a while to catch up. And it was clear that when that game was put out, people weren't, and not just that game, but the other games that we're talking about in this segment, they weren't ready yet. There's just a specific set of things that you've got to hit in a beat 'em up. Well, no pun intended. There are certain gameplay things you've got to get. You've got to have a move set that makes you feel like you belong in a fight. Some of these games, when you've got the girl with a ponytail beating an 8-foot tall supervillain to death, it doesn't feel that way. There's just something clunky about the way these games play, and you've got beat 'em ups by far lesser companies that came out. I think even Iron Commando plays better than some of these games.
It does, yes.
And that's crazy.
Wow.
But like Sam said, you had comic books. They were in that stage where they were kind of moving out of being able to find them all the time in supermarkets and at the drugstore everywhere. I mean, comics used to be, you didn't have to walk that far to find a comic. You didn't have to go only to a comic book store to find comic books back then. They were everywhere. That's how I got into them. But you have a chance to hit the national stage like that, and to just, well, we got to get this out in a certain time frame, so just hurry up and make this. Sure, there are people that have fond memories of these games, but in the long run, it couldn't have helped.
Yeah, it was just, I'd say rushed. It was a pretty good way to put that. It's like, gotta listen to the bean counters, right?
Yep. Especially if your game company is run by people who are more or less concerned about trying to get toys out for Christmas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that mindset with a game, it's gonna hurt, and people are gonna remember the name of your company after you burn them that first time.
Oh, have they ever? And Mike, what about you to wrap this particular segment up?
Well, I already ranted a lot of vitriol about Death and Return of Superman on the Brawlers Roundtable, so I'm not going to repeat that. Just go back to hear my expulsion of mediocrity over that dreck. Maximum Carnage, I think, is a less shitty game, but it certainly ain't no fancy feast neither, so to speak. I mean, let me ask the experts here, James and or Sam, was the actual Maximum Carnage storyline in the 90s any good?
It was decent.
Okay, so
let me put it like this: it was popular.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But I mean,
it was big.
I mean, this was right before Todd McFarlane started Image, right? That was the last big thing that he did at Marvel. And he had basically pioneered Venom and then Carnage, and so like this was the last really big arc, and then he washed his hands of the whole thing, and he's like, I'm gonna go create my own comic book studio. But it wasn't very good. It was very much an artist-driven storyline, and like you said, a popularity-driven storyline, because you had two incredibly popular evil Spider-Men driving the story. But it was just kind of
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the impression that I get from what I know. Sorry, James. Yeah.
The one thing that I did like about Maximum Carnage are, instead of stages, a lot of parts of it were just kind of the set pieces based on scenes from the comics.
That is pretty neat. Yeah.
yeah.
If they had more time to work on it, it feels like it probably would have been a really, really great game. And one of the other things I liked about it, you had strikers, and I'm trying to think. I think this probably beat. It had to have beat not Captain. It had to have beat Avengers Galactic Storm, the Data East fighting game, where they introduced the concept of strikers as far as characters you can't play as, but they jump in the battle to help. And it was a cool way to make you feel like you were part of the Marvel Universe while you're playing the game.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the Galactic Storm did come later. This was like 93 and 94. Pretty sure that game, Galactic Storm, was 95, so... yeah, that is a pretty neat concept, and you have some semi-deep cuts in there, like Firestarter and Deathlock, as well as Iron Fist, many years before Netflix fucking ruined him, but that's neither here nor there.
And he was newly back from the dead, too, so...
Oh, of course he was. Everyone was at some fucking point in their comic lifetimes, I am sure. Anyway, but yeah, Maximum Carnage, I think its controls are kind of janky. I don't like how throwing works. It's really much more of a detriment in how it controls. And yeah, the title is total fucking false advertising. It really should have had 2-player co-op in it. But I don't know, I have a little bit of nostalgic attachment to the game. It's not the worst beat-em-up I've ever played. I like it more than Death Return of Superman, for what it's worth, but it is also kind of bullshittingly hard and just, I don't know, just kind of janky. I mean, the most notable thing about the game to me is that for some reason, the song Carnage Rules by the band Green Jelly was marketed for it. In fact, they might have made it for the game. I don't remember that exactly.
That is the best thing about any of those, by the way.
Absolutely, yes. And on top of that, bizarrely enough, one of the other, like, there aren't too many in-game tracks, but one of them completely rips off the Mob Rules from Dio-era Black Sabbath. Like, it's not even it's not even like a Jimmy Hart sound-alike. It is straight up fucking plagiarism. It's kind of astounding. I don't know how they're able to get away with that, but
that.
yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, didn't play much Separation Anxiety. It feels like a chintzy ripoff of an already pretty chintzy game, so I don't have much to say about it. It's just awful. Like a copy of a, like that 9 Inch Nails song. It's just inferior in every way, and you know, considering its basis, that's not good at all.
Yeah.
So,
well, all I can really say about those games is I hate them. I owned Death and Return of Superman for the Genesis for a while. Promptly
Why?
got rid of it.
okay.
When I was hanging out with Andre when I was much younger, he's a huge Spider-Man fan, so of course he had to get Maximum Carnage and Separation Anxiety, and I thought they both sucked. He loved them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hate all three of them. So, before... go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say, and that's the thing that you're going to find is that you're gonna run into a lot of people who they love those comics and they love the games, and any criticism that you have that makes any sort of sense won't make any sense to them. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna down anyone else's opinions and stuff, and there's a game that we kind of skipped before this that is far, far worse, and the team that made it had far less time, and that would be Spider-Man and the X-Men.
That was
Arcade
actually
Revenge.
what I was going to hit.
Oh,
Okay. I thought we were kind of going in chronological order or something.
Here and there. So since
Sorry
you
about
brought
that.
it, well, since you brought it up, go ahead and let us hear about it.
Okay. Well, the premise of the game, if you haven't heard about it, is Spider-Man's going through the city as usual, gets caught up in some stuff, and finds out he's been captured by Arcade, who already captured 4 of the X-Men. Now, what the game turns into is you're going through these stages that are basically death traps by a villain named Arcade, who his whole gimmick is he captures superheroes and puts them in a large, elaborate death trap filled with robots made to look like other things. Usually they're enemies, sometimes they're friends. Stage has its own wrinkles to it, and some even have their own engines. Spider-Man and Wolverines, they're not that bad to me. It seems like they knew they had to nail those parts, and they got those down pretty well. But once you get to Cyclops, it's a minecart level in a superhero game.
Oh, good lord!
That's not right. A minecart level. You put a minecart level in something like Tasmania or Super Muffin Kids or whatever goofy, cutesy game that you're doing, but you put a minecart. But in a way, it's kind of funny because it's almost like Arcade decided to make a bunch of death traps based on really, really annoying video game types. And Gambits is even worse because you're running from this giant ball. Yeah, you're running from a giant spiked ball, and it's a constantly auto-scrolling stage where nothing cares about you. It is basically made to crush the human spirit.
Sounds about right.
Do you want to get into Storm's level, or is this too traumatizing already?
Oh my god.
I'm still trying. I'm trying to process this in front of other people, and it's hard. But thank you for thank you for standing by me through this.
No problem. Continue at your leisure, sir.
And then Storm's level. Imagine if you had to do the water levels in Sonic a lot. That's it, as a whole stage. That's Storm's level, and she has to go and get oxygen from these different places in the maze. And it's just, oh man,
He's not wrong. I remember playing this. He's exactly right. That's it exactly.
And I look back. I think about when I rented it multiple times, trying to think, okay, maybe I just wasn't in the mood to get into it and play it the first time. And it's like, nope, I'm not enjoying this. And it took me years later to get the idea that, okay, Arcade's pretty much it. If you read the comments, Arcade's a dick.
Yeah, I've seen him in the comments before.
And this game is the kind of game that Arcade would make if he could make a video game. Because it seems like something that a complete dick would make.
As Rex said in the chat, Arcade's revenge is against everyone who played the game.
Exactly. He's 100% right.
Yep.
I'm done talking about that. But the one thing I will repeat, it does seem like they had the basis for a really good Spider-Man game, the works in those Spider-Man sections, and then if we go into that later game, we'll talk about that.
I mean, yeah, the Spider-Man mechanics were really, really solid. That first opening level was, I really enjoyed that as it was, but it was just all too brief. But once you got into the main part of the game, there's this quality that the game has, and James kind of touched on it, where your brain doesn't quite process how bad the game is to you as the player, and you're just like, well, am I just this bad at the game? No, my memories can't be this bad. And so, you after turning it off and you let it sit for a while, you go back to the well and you try to play it again, and you're like, no, it's not just me. And then later on, you're like, but it couldn't have been that bad. And it has to happen 4 or 5 times before it starts to sink in that this is not supposed to be enjoyable. So
it took just one play for me. I was like, I'm done with this. Yeah, let it be said, I hate this game too.
I thankfully have not played it very much, but I mean, I certainly didn't blow any money on it. But three things I will say. One, why all the fucking minecart levels in the fucking 90s and fucking video games around that fucking time?
Mike,
Why?
if I
None
can-
of them were good! Jesus fuck!
All right, Mike, if I could interrupt your rant for a second.
Sure.
There is only one thing a minecart stage should be in, and that's any game based on Indiana Jones and the Temple of
Jones.
Doom.
Yes, that's
Yes.
it. That's the only acceptable fucking usage.
Exactly.
It was all balls otherwise. All. No exceptions.
I'll give
Even in good
I'll
games.
give a pass to DuckTales because DuckTales
Oh.
was kind of trying to go for some Indiana Jones type stuff.
I forgot that had the minecart in the African mines level. Yeah, okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair.
But
All right, what's your second thing?
guess who developed this game? It's like the third or fourth fucking time I'm bringing them up tonight.
BM Software?
Software Creations.
Oh, boy.
Wrong software. Sorry, but yeah, I misheard you. But yeah, what is with those guys? Why did they make all these shitty? I guess they're just kind of a go-to for LJN because they work for cheap. I don't know.
They were like the Micronics of their time.
Yeah, Western Micronics. That's not a bad way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
Three. This game did at least have a great soundtrack by the Fallen Brothers. Both Tim and Jeff worked on this one. But my god, if the Fallen Curse does not apply to this, like, maybe the most blatant and extreme example, and for one that was actually done by both of them. This game, again, the Spider-Man bits are passable, but there are even better Spider-Man games to play, and there are sure as cocksure fuck are much better X-Men games to play. This one's just an abomination. Just don't touch it, kids. Not even once.
You know, if Captain America was here circa Age of Ultron, he'd be telling you right now, language.
He would. I just had to let loose. The mood of the room just felt like, blow this game up into nuclear bits. It is the worst thing.
There's something about the game that inspires that Dolomite style language.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't blame you for I don't blame you for using some blue language. Working blue here.
I'm not even as personally burned by this one as I was Death and Return of Superman. I just recognize from afar that looking at this one just gives you a headache, looking at some sort of Elder God spawn or some bullshit like that. It's yikes.
And also once you get burned by something like the NES version of X-Men, you think LJN and you're kind of cautious about it. That's why I only rented it, because I bought X-Men.
That was a very wise and informed decision of you, and then they just wouldn't really get much better. Maximum Carnage was probably the least shitty thing they approved of, possibly, maybe, but oh god, what?
Though that was the same thing with me, except in my case it was Back to the Future, and got burned once, and after that when 2 and 3 came out for the NES, that's still LJN, and it's too. No, I'm gonna rent this.
Mm-hmm.
Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me 7 or more times, shame on you. Anyway, in the interest of time, just so you know, there are several other 16-bit games we could cover, but there's the original Spider-Man for the Genesis and Sega CD. There was the X-Men games for the Genesis. There was the Wolverine Adamantium Rage. But in order to get on to a different subject, I just want to talk about one more 16-bit game. And it may be the best Spider-Man game ever to come out of that era, but was left in Japan. The Amazing Spider-Man Lethal Foes. So let's kick it off with James. Got anything to say about this one?
I'm just gonna stay bitter that we never got this legally over here, because it is so much better than what we got. Only one that came close was now you call it Spider-Man the Animated Series, but it was just called Spider-Man back then. And that was the one that I was kind of hinting at when I said that they had a halfway decent Spider-Man engine in Spider-Man the X-Men. It seemed like they kind of worked on it, and that game I had fun with. But Lethal Foes is just so much more polished.
Oh yeah.
And than any other 16-bit Spider-Man game we ever got. And it's weird that it was only in Japan.
Mm-hmm. The swinging mechanics in that, the animation as he moves along the ceiling and the walls and stuff, it's just it's so
it's accurate and it's seamless. If the whole point is to make you feel like Spider-Man when you're playing the game, as far as what you can pull off and what you can do in it and what you're dealing with, that game just got it dead on.
Oh yeah.
And it is just weird that it takes Japanese companies to do that. And the companies where the characters were created, it took a while, but in this era at least, things kind of fell short.
Yeah. Before we move on, I just want to address something Rex said in the chat, which was the only good Back to the Future game was the Telltale series, and that's sad. I disagree. I quite like Super Back to the Future Part 2 for the Super Famicom. Again, another one that never made it over here. It's not the greatest game, but it's miles above every other Back to the Future game I'd ever played. So, that said...
and that's one I heard about just because of you.
You're welcome. All right, now Sam, I've talked this game up for ages. Have you ever actually checked it out?
I have not, sadly. I mean, that's one of the ones that you really put the bug in my ear about, and I'm really anxious to give it a shot, but I have not yet. So, I mean, the fact that you both are giving it such a glowing review here and now is just making it that much more imperative that I try it in the near future.
Oh, definitely.
It was worth the effort.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, as the Spider-Man Avatared one, what do you think of it?
I really haven't played it as much as I should have, honestly. It's pretty good from what I have played, except I think I remember getting kind of semi-lost and frustrated in this sewer-type area, and then I never really got back to it afterward. Call that a skill issue, if you will, but... Right. You fought the lizard down there, that's right.
Yeah, the sewer can be a little tricky to navigate through the first time you do it, but you get used to it after a while, and yes, the lizard is the boss.
Yeah, that would totally track. Well, it's one that I could definitely do to play more, and I probably should be ashamed that I haven't, but there was one more 16-bit game I was hoping we could talk about, even though, again, time constraints are what they are. So,
which one was that?
X-Men 2 Clone Wars?
Yeah, I kind of lumped that in with the X-Men games on the Genesis, which I couldn't stand the first one, but I didn't mind that one, but yeah, I would like to actually move on past the 16-bit stuff.
Okay, well,
so
fair enough.
But I'll just add a little bit about Lethal Foes here. Basically, that aside from everything we mentioned already, it's also, you get guest appearances by so many different comic characters. Every boss is a member of Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery, and that's something they just made up. And it's like in the first stage, you beat the Beetle, and the Human Torch comes along to tell you something. So stuff like that, which is just nice. And on top of that, between every stage, JJJ actually makes a comment about Spider-Man. Of course, it's in Japanese, but I'm sure you can probably imagine what he says. That wall-crawling menace. So, but I'd like to talk for a little bit about some of the superhero arcade games that have come out. And I think, again, we should start with Superman, the 1987 Taito game. That's one of my favorite superhero arcade games. Sam, I know you're big on this one, so let's kick this off with you.
Well, I mean, this is one of my absolute favorite arcade games of all time. And that's saying something because there's so many good ones, but in terms of like just a Superman video game, it's one of the very few times that they managed to get uh, everything working to a nominal level at least, and make Superman actually feel like Superman. And they did it by 3 different game engines, um, and it took that many different types of gameplay to get it to work. But you had Superman as like a side-scrolling brawler. You had Superman as like a vertical flight sim, and then you had Superman in a side-scrolling shooter, and it just felt like you were playing as the Man of Steel. And the only thing that you could possibly say that didn't feel accurate was just the health bar. But the fact that you were fighting other aliens kind of mitigated that because you didn't really know how powerful they were in comparison to Kryptonians. So it kind of worked. The only thing that I felt was kind of another drawback to it was there weren't really any classic villains. In fact, none of the classic Superman villains showed up. But it was still a wonderful experience, and I sank many, many, many quarters into that in the arcades.
Yes, yeah, I've only got one question about that game, which is basically it can be a 2-player co-op game. What's with the red Superman?
I mean, I guess it was just a palette swap, but I mean, it's the playground legend was that it was supposed to be Shazam. You know, like when you're on the playground with your friends, and you're all talking about video games. That was the thing. They're like, no, that's supposed to be Shazam. I know it looks like Superman, but it's supposed to be Shazam. That was the whole thing. But I have no idea what the actual story was.
Yeah, I think it would be like Supergirl or somebody like that. But maybe it was just a rights issue. Like, for some reason, they could use Superman, but not Supergirl or any of his rogues gallery.
Supergirl's actually in the ROM. She just was unused. Her sprite's in the ROM, which is weird.
Well, nobody really knows who that character is because they don't have the color data for it. Because a long time ago, I found the sprite tiles. This was even before I knew about the whole F4 button in main thing where you can look at the sprite tiles there. When I was looking into ROM hacking, I wanted to go into Superman and actually add some of the villains. When I looked in there, I'm scrolling through there and I see these sprites that are bigger than normal, and there's a woman there, and I think there's 3 sprites for each of them. And this actually popped up, and I feel bad that I can't remember the name of the book, but someone else brought that up, and they talked to some people at DC, and they never really even heard about them trying to put a character in there, because some people tried to say, oh, well, that's supposed to be Power Girl because she's got boots that kind of look like Power Girls, and the colors, if you flip through, there's an option in main where you can flip through the different palettes that are available whenever you have the game, wherever you are in the game's memory, and it gives her blonde hair. And there's almost a argument you could make where it looks like she might be Power Girl, but not really. So people have been trying to say it's her too, but it's not. And it's on I think whatchamacallit, what's that, the Hidden Palace? With all the stuff that's cut out of games.
The
cutting room floor. That's what, yeah. They've got a thing on that, but it's like I found it like that program Tarako, that's so old, it has trouble working in newer operating systems. This was like, So it was like in 2002. And I was like, what am I looking at? That was the first time I ever looked in the graphics of a video game and saw nothing I had never seen before. Hopefully one day we run into some kind of weird interview somewhere that's on Shmuplations where somebody got to talk to someone at Taito and they explained what the heck the deal was with that woman hiding in the ROM tiles.
That would be nice.
You know, failing that, I would just love to get an interview about this game in general, because there's not a whole lot of information on its development.
Nope.
Yeah, seriously. So. And it's like you said, it captures everything. It captures so much that you like about Superman. If you look at almost every Superman cartoon up to that point, there's a part where he's either tunneling through the earth by punching or he's flying through space hitting space rocks. And you've got that in the side-scrolling, the shoot-'em-up scene, where you can use your heat vision, but you can punch him too. I mean, it's something that's so classic, they just always put that in there. And once again, it's weird that a Japanese company was able to capture that essence so perfectly when American companies fall so short when they're asked to adapt these games. But they were just so, and especially, Taito, they're video game legends. They made Space Invaders, but just the fact that they were able to get that so right, like you said, I lost so many quarters in that game, but I enjoyed every minute of it. And the schoolyard talk where I was the same thing. Everybody just said it was supposed to be Captain Marvel. Or if you only knew, or because all the merchandising had to have Shazam because of the weird legal stuff.
Yep.
But if you watched it, but even in the cartoons and on the show, they called him Captain Marvel. They just couldn't call whatever he was in. They couldn't call whatever he was in Captain Marvel.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think that
weird.
Yeah, I think but also once again, I think that's more of a memory issue. If you couldn't have as many you couldn't have as many sprites saved up in the system's memory if you had a complete other character who was just as animated as Superman in there as well. So if you just have one set of sprites for the player character, you have a lot more room for all these other weird things that were popping up, and there were some giant characters in that, like the elephant head guys. Or the giant lizard guys that were way bigger than Superman.
Yeah, that's right.
And like Sam said, they got around the issue by making them aliens. You don't know how strong they are, so it's not like some gangster walks up to Superman, nudges him on his elbow, and Superman falls over like a little kid. These are aliens. They could be just as strong as he is. You don't know. So that gimmick works out perfectly.
They could have punched him so hard he traveled back in time to 1776.
The thing that really struck me about this game is like when you got whacked on your last tick on your life bar, Superman would like degenerate into like this digital wireframe, and it's like, what the heck are they doing to him when they're actually killing him? It's like, I've never seen anything like that in the comics. Like, what kind of power is this? And you run around play acting on the playground with your friends, and they're like, I'm one of those aliens, and they whack you, and you're falling apart, and it just kind of adds to the mythos in its own way.
Superman got de-rezzed.
There you go. That's exactly it.
And once again, like you said, I really want to hear from the developers on that, because it just seems like it would be a great story, and you really want to hear from the people who made this great game.
Agreed. All right, how about you, Mike?
I can't really add much more except to say that John Williams' Superman theme, as rendered by Taito's legendary in-house band Zuntata, that is a chef's kiss, as they say on the internet. Goddamn-tastic. But yeah, aside from the 2600 game, possibly, this is pretty much the best Superman game by default. There's not really much I can think of to challenge it. It's PDG. It's pretty damn great.
Yep.
and you can't beat hearing that theme bouncing through the walls of the arcade back in the day. It's like when you could hear that, it's like, oh, I know where Superman is, and you know where to go. I mean, that's perfect marketing.
Absolutely.
It worked with that, and it worked perfectly with the Turtles.
Oh yes. There was a semi-trollish question I wanted to ask though. What was the deal with Superman Red and Superman Blue?
In the comics?
Yeah, because that's what I'm thinking of when I see Player 2 in this game, and I don't know a thing about it. Apparently everyone hated it.
Are we talking about like the 90s version of Superman Red and Superman Blue, or the Silver Age?
Silver Age from like the early 80s or whatever.
I think that's more Bronze Age.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that was before. That's one of those stories I haven't read it yet either. That was way earlier.
Oh, it's probably
way earlier than the 80s.
Thing, wasn't it? Like it was one of those truly bizarre things where like Superman gets split into two different entities, and one is more mild-mannered and the other one is more impulsive and hot-headed. And then in the 90s, Superman got that energy form and wound up getting split into two different energy forms, red and blue. And it took a giant cluster to change things back. But it was just that's to me that's one of those real comics things.
Yep.
So
before we go on, I just wanted to say in the chat we've got a raid from LDP's channel.
Hey, cool.
Looks like L, Yasuke, and LDP himself are all here. So welcome aboard, guys. Thanks for the raid.
Very nice.
Yep. So yeah, we're in the middle of discussing the superhero arcade games right now. For those of you who just joined us. So, and again, there's so many and we can't possibly cover all of them. But there were a couple of standouts I wanted to hit. Like that Sega Spider-Man game.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, L, we just finished Superman Arcade, but we're going to talk about the Spider-Man game by Sega now, which was really great. I remember playing that once in the arcade, and it was just kind of blown away because it was so much better than the Genesis games that had come out. So, what do you think, James?
Oh man, that was one of my definite go-tos whenever I hit the arcade back in the day, and especially since we had the 4-player version. You had Spider-Man, you had Black Cat, and I know somebody's going to complain about one of the other characters in there, and you had Namor, and of course you had Hawkeye, because Hawkeye was somehow everywhere in Marvel video games.
I have no idea why.
He had bad luck, but a good press agent, I guess. But there was just something about the way that game played, as far as the beat 'em up sections were fun, and every character had their own little quirk where they could use their powers. And a lot of people don't know, Namor does have the ability to mimic any ability of any sea creature. So when he does the electricity, he's doing the electric eel thing, because he can do that. And he did that a few times in some comics, so that's not out of nowhere. But and that was, I think, even before the Genesis game, that was the first time I ever saw Venom in a video game. And that tripped me out, because in most media, we're used to the same classic Spider-Man villains. Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, the Lizard, Sandman, Electro, and the Scorpion, who you see first. Then all of a sudden, Venom pops out. And Venom's still kind of relatively new when this game was made.
That's true. Then it becomes
the other cool
King Kong battle after that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was crazy. I mean, it's not comic accurate, but it was fun. Nobody really cared. Because if something's fun enough, people will just let it slide.
Well, I mean, that
The
was
other
the
thing,
catch, though. Like, it was in the attract mode that you were gonna be able to face off against like a 3-story tall Venom, and it's like, whoa,
oh
what the heck is
yeah,
this?
that was cool. The other thing, and it took me years to realize that this is what the game turns into. Those side-scrolling parts are also pretty much a Sega version of Strider before they made a cartridge of Strider later on when they did the Genesis port.
Yeah, I can see that.
But those Spider-Man parts are really, and it's funny because I played that before I ever got to play Strider, so it's kind of backwards for me. But just both of those game engines were really fun to play, and it was really a blast if you had like some of your friends with you, or just random arcade strangers would come over and say, "Oh, okay, so this controller's free. I'll go ahead and play this character." Once you had all 4 people on there, just basically whipping the New York underworld's butt and going to Latveria to fight Doctor Doom. It was just crazy fun.
Yeah, I actually never got to play with multiple people. The one time I found it, I was alone playing, but still, I enjoyed the hell out of it. So, what about you, Sam? Anything else to add about this?
I mean, I'm glad I wasn't the only one that enjoyed it that much, because that one, I mean, between the Superman game, Spider-Man, the Spider-Man arcade game, and the X-Men arcade game, and the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, I probably lost easily $300 in quarters over a single summer. Just hanging out at like the local Showbiz Pizza with some friends, and it was crazy because those games were just the most popular ones around. And it's just like James said, like, whether you had your friends there with you and you were all just whooping up on the game itself, or the moment that you put a quarter in and the music started pumping, other people would want to come up and play. And it was just crazy. It was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, that is true. How about you?
Oh,
Mike?
and I just
Go ahead.
Oh, really quick, I just noticed in the chat that Snarb mentioned the whole Strider thing with Spider-Man, with the side-scrolling part, with the platforming parts, where they zoom out. So it's nice to see I'm not the only one who felt like that.
I know I never made it that far at the time, but it was still really, really cool when I got to play it later. And kind of realized that. It's like, this reminds me of something. Strider? Yeah, kind of. Sorry, Snarb, but nothing's changed. So I'm not sure why it's echoing again. Anyway, Mike, your thoughts?
Some of my favorite of the arcade Marvel beat 'em ups, but it is pretty cool. Trying to think if there's anything else I could say really that hasn't been said. The Green Goblin is a huge pain in the ass to fight in this one. I mean, for mostly terrestrially based characters, with his glider mobility, he's exactly as hard to actually hit as you would expect him to be. But, yeah, it does represent Spidey's rogues gallery quite well on the whole. I mean, you got Electro, you got Doc Ock, you have the Kingpin in there also. Although for some reason the ultimate villain ends up being Doctor Doom, who I believe he had fingers in like everyone's pies outside of the Fantastic Four around that time. But I mean, spoilers, the actual final boss is a reprise of Venom, and due to like the MacGuffin or whatever, he's like cloned himself a lot. It's pretty cool. The game definitely has style. It just feels a little bit slow to me, is all I will admit. But it's still pretty cool. It has
it has cool aesthetics, very comic accurate aesthetics that I do appreciate, even if I'm a little bit icy on the gameplay.
I'll just say one thing about it, and that I think the game over screen is hilarious.
And it is funny with just the busted mask and everything. Like, oh well.
Yep.
Oh, and there's one thing. Mike mentioned with Doctor Doom being the final villain in it. During the early '80s, there were two Spider-Man cartoons going on at the same time where Doctor Doom showed up a lot. He was in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends for a few episodes, and there was also a separate solo Spider-Man cartoon in syndication that had what was pretty much a stealth running storyline in it, centered around Doctor Doom. And some people call it the Trilogy of Doom. Now, I think the same writer even wrote all 3 episodes in it. Those are pretty much what you hear a lot in those MF Doom's beats and samples. You'll hear, especially the part from We Need Food. That's a villager from one of the Doctor Doom episodes. So I don't know if that had an influence on Doctor Doom making it into the game like that, but it's a possibility.
That could be. Now, LDP asked if there was an arcade version of the Super NES or Genesis Maximum Carnage. There was not, but we actually discussed the whole mob rules thing earlier.
I brought that up, and once again, I will say it was not even an homage. It was just outright plagiarism. All it needed was, Ronnie James Dio himself saying, "If you listen to fools, the mob rules." Oh, Jesus, I'm not doing that again. I'm sorry.
You're no Dio. Sorry.
Yeah, no, R.I.P. It's truly a talent we will never get back.
That is true.
And that I will not deign to recreate ever again in my life, ever.
Good.
Yes.
Now, we did cover, we mentioned the Batman arcade game briefly a while back. But that said, I'd like to kind of focus on the X-Men game for a little bit. That was one where I actually did get to play with a full 6 players. And that was just insanely fun. And I like it quite a bit. It's not the greatest Konami beat 'em up, but it's definitely a good one. What do you think, James?
Oh, I've got an extra reason why I like this game a lot. I was one of those lucky people. I qualified as a teenager back then. All right, back in the '80s, they had a show that was syndicated called Well, some people know this already. It was called Marvel Action Universe. What they usually showed was the RoboCop syndicated series, Dino Riders, and sometimes they would show the Spider-Man solo syndicated series I mentioned earlier, which, like I said, might have influenced Doctor Doom being in Spider-Man's game. But the team that was working on that show, they took the budget for one RoboCop episode, and instead of making that episode, they made a 1-episode pilot called X-Men, Pride of the X-Men, and that's where these designs come from. I saw this the morning it aired. There was no warning or anything. It was just suddenly an X-Men cartoon was on in around 1989. And I'm just sitting there looking at this animation like, man, this is amazing. This should be a show. But it never got picked up as a series. But they took those designs, and that's what's in the Konami X-Men game. If you look around YouTube, you'll probably find Pride of the X-Men if you haven't seen it, or you didn't grow up, if you weren't growing up during the time and saw it on VHS, which is where most people saw it. But I saw it on TV, and I just kind of freaked out because all of a sudden there's an unknown X-Men cartoon showing up on TV. But like you said, once you get this game going with 6 different people, it's just amazing to play it. I mean, you're fighting a bunch of Sentinels. The way they explode when you kill them off is nice. And they even bring in villains that weren't in that animated pilot. So they must have got some extra reference material. Even to the point where when you fight the Wendigo, he says Wendigo. If you read the comics, it's spaced out like that with hyphens. he says it exactly like that. So whoever they had working on this game, they did some nice deep cuts.
Oh yeah. Sam, what about you?
I mean, this was one of the real quarter munchers in the local arcade where I grew up, and so I spent many a quarter on this game as well. We had the full 6-person version, and the one with the double screens and everything. And once the music started pumping, it was just like a magnet for a crowd. But like Turtles, there always seemed to be fights that broke out over specific characters. Nobody wanted to be Dazzler. Everybody wanted to be Wolverine.
Of course.
Which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because it seemed to me like Cyclops was actually better in the game than Wolverine was. But I mean, it was kind of phenomenal because this is even before the Fox Kids X-Men show that really broke X-Men to like a whole new generation of kids. This game was like the first real showcase of what made the X-Men like special as a comic book property and also just as a superhero team, and what was the whole attraction and what their whole deal was. Because before this, I mean, you really only had that Pride of the X-Men thing that very, very few people saw, and that James is very lucky to have seen on broadcast TV.
Yeah.
And this was the gateway for X-Men for a whole new audience. I mean, I know that I didn't know much about the X-Men before playing this game. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth.
And how about you, Mike?
I'm not quite as enthused about this one as most others I know are, so hot take. I do find its origins interesting. I respect the 6-player craziness that it can get to, but as a lone wolf myself, who's barely had anyone to play with these types of games throughout my life, I just kind of I just kind of missed out on that aspect, and so I was just kind of focused on the raw gameplay, and it's kind of sloppy compared to other beat 'em ups. I am a very snobbish connoisseur of beat 'em ups, and I understand if like this one's not quite as technically detailed, to compensate for relatively easier play as per the group of friends playing this one, but I don't know. There's a good deal to like about it. It is quite comics accurate. Yeah, having like Wendigo and Nimrod in there were pretty nice deep cuts, and some of the voices are hilarious. Like nothing moves the blob. That's pretty all time for what it's worth. That's for sure. But I don't know. Of the 4 arcade Marvel beat 'em ups at the time, this one's honestly my least favorite, below Spider-Man, Captain America: The Avengers, and absolutely below The Punisher, which is my favorite of the 4. So I'm sorry, direct your hate mail at me if you'd like to.
No worries, Mike. All
I could be wrong if I want to.
Well, hey, Punisher's a solid game. Yeah, it's one of Capcom's beat 'em ups, so there you go. Anyone who's just played the Genesis version has missed out.
Absolutely.
Now, LDP is not going to do what he could do, but just to let him know that Batman arcade game was based on the '89 movie, and it was more or less a platformer, if I remember correctly, not really a beat 'em up or anything like that. Yeah. And I pretty much echo what James and Sam said about X-Men. There is one thing I really liked about that when I first saw it, and it's the whole the opening when the you get the music kind of just comes in, and then Magneto's like X-Men, and it starts the music and all that, and then the Blackbird flies overhead, and it actually is so loud it drowns out the music. It was just like, okay, I'm trying this. So, given that, let's move on to Captain America and the Avengers. James, want to kick this one off?
Yeah, since I grew up in an era where basically the big three of Marvel, it was Spider-Man, Hulk, and Captain America. This was before the X-Men got big, so I was a big fan of Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, because they would show the cartoons on TV. That was my gateway. So over time, you saw Iron Man and Thor a lot less, but you saw Wolverine everywhere. So seeing an Avengers game just kind of blew my mind. So you had Cap, Iron Man, and then you had, like I said, they had their own cartoons. They were big, but you had Hawkeye and Vision in there, so that was surprising. And I mean, this game is just so full of deep cuts, it's ridiculous. And it does that. It also does this. Besides having that, it's an engine that kind of reminds you of the Turtles as far as the, you kind of have loose throws. It's not like Final Fight. You walk up, you get a solid grab, and you throw somebody. It's close to Turtles, but there's a little bit of Capcom flair in there. Just the amount of obscure villains they were throwing at you, that pretty much I was possibly the only person in the arcade who knew who these ridiculous people were. It just blew my mind as I played through it. And then, even as you're playing, Quicksilver runs past you and throws you a power-up. And then later on, you have Wonder Man fly by, and he drops off what turns out to be one of the sky sleds that you play in the shooter sections. And then the idea that you have a solid beat-em-up. Then after that, the shooter sections are even fun. And then it's one of my favorite comic books at the time, because Roger Stern he had a pretty good run on not pretty good. He had one of the best runs on Avengers during this time, including a storyline called Under Siege, where the Masters of Evil finally decide, why don't we just overpower the Avengers? So they basically just get an army together to be the Masters of Evil and fight them. And you're almost fighting a group that size in this game. But just one of the other things I liked about it, the backgrounds were actually painted instead of being pixel art. So for the longest time, it was the closest I was going to get to an Avengers cartoon that was worth anything, I should say, because that one that was on Fox didn't turn out that well, but this game pretty much made up for it as far as I was concerned. Probably, and it's another case where even people who didn't know who the Avengers were had fun with it, just with all the crazy vocal samples in it, saying "Don't disturb us," and what was the
one escaping.
And Ultron saying "Ask the police," which is a pretty bad remake of NWA's classic, but we won't go into that. Yeah. It was just nuts. And again, it was probably the first time most people had seen any of these characters anywhere, because most of these characters were never in the cartoons or anything, unless you saw the really old 1960 reruns from the 1960s. That's where most people knew Iron Man from. Ghostface Killer's samples are from that. But the power that these games have, you see the stuff going on, and it makes you want to know more about the characters, and quite a few people did. It was probably one of the highest points that the Avengers had in the 90s, because basically the X-Men ruled the 90s as far as in comics and outside comics.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, something you said about Wolverine just reminded me of something. There was a parody comic that I read for a while, enough to actually buy the physical release. And it's basically about these characters from different franchises trying to go ahead and stop the Mary Sues from taking over. But a couple of them end up in the Marvel universe, and they go to find the X-Men to ask them about the Mary Sue of their universe, and the X-Mansion's been basically blitzed, and Wolverine's there. And they're like, well, we're going to get going then. Thanks for all your help. And Wolverine's like, I'm going with you. And they're all like, I don't really think that's necessary. And Captain America's like, no, if there's a team somewhere around here, Wolverine has to be on it for some reason. He's like, shut that right, bub. So, yeah, he was just kind of everywhere for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah, he, like I said, originally it used to be Spider-Man, Hulk, and Captain America. They were on most of the Marvel merchandise up until the mid or late 80s, and that's when Wolverine started working his way in. Especially with that Art Adams drawn poster you'd see when he had his claws out and he's like slowly walking towards the viewer. That poster was in stores everywhere.
I remember
So you started seeing that way more than you saw anything with Captain America or even the Hulk on it. So to see an Avengers game at that point, I mean, that was big.
Mm-hmm. So, Sam, what do you think about Captain America and the Avengers?
This was not one that I played in the arcades. I managed to have completely missed this one. I didn't play it until it was on the Super Nintendo. And I played this with one of my cousins, and I was less than impressed with that adaptation. Because, I really wonder how much better it was in the arcade version than the Super NES outing, because it was just about unplayable.
Yeah, the Super NES was noted for having the worst port of that game.
Yeah, the Genesis port is way better.
Oh yeah.
And my cousin had a Super NES, so that was the version that we rented. But it was just, I don't even know how to describe the looseness of the controls. And this is from someone who put up with a fair bit of that NES Spider-Man game. So,
wow. Yeah, I rented the SNES port, and it was horrible.
Yeah,
it's on. I'd say it's just around SNES Pit Fighter bad,
and that's bad.
Yeah.
I mean, but the arcade game and the Genesis port of it, both, and the Genesis port even managed to get the sound samples in there. They didn't even bother with the SNES version.
I think what happened was that Data East actually handled the Genesis port, and they licensed the Super NES port out to somebody else. Probably.
I think it was
software.
Was it Mindscape?
Might have been.
It's been a while since I saw that. Hold on a second. Excuse me. And it's another case of who knows how much time they even had to be able to do that.
Also true. Well, let's see. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can add too much more what's been said. It is quite a good game. I remember that just because he looked the coolest, I always picked Iron Man back then. It does have a pretty nice spate of somewhat obscure villains like Living Laser and Wizard et al. With not the smoothest playing game, it is pretty solid and rather comics accurate, but I do have one question about it. What the hell was up with Juggernaut's appearance in this game? Because he has he looks more brown than red, as I recall, and his helmet's just like a red dot or whatever that like completely obscures his face. Is he supposed to be like a robot? Is there some sort of basis in the comics for this appearance of Juggernaut or whatever? I've always wondered that for a while.
You got me on
Not,
that one.
not that I know of. My only guess is maybe it was some kind of weird rights issue thing with Juggernaut also being in other games that they could have been working on at the time. That's just like that robot you fight in there is definitely a Sentinel, because I've seen there's an online manual for you can find a PDF for this arcade game if you look on the internet hard enough and you read through the manual. It does mention the Sentinel by name in it, so it's definitely a Sentinel. It could, those things go haywire. They don't just hunt mutants all the time, and you've got Quicksilver running around. Could have been chasing him if you want to find an excuse. It really is just a big old robot to whoop on.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Juggernaut, I never got that with basically a red siren light for a face. That was kind of, but like I said, it could have been a rights thing.
Yeah, certainly possible.
Possible, yeah.
Now, I just want to add one thing about the game. Vision's walk cycle is absolutely hysterical.
It's pretty great, yeah.
He just walking around with his arms folded on his tiptoes. I showed that to my youngest stepdaughter, who's a pretty big Vision fan, and she about fell on the floor when she saw him doing that. So, yeah, Snarb.
Can't blame her for that.
Yeah, Snarb brought up something interesting.
Oh,
So that's
wow.
exactly how the Juggernaut-alike in Werewolf the Last Warrior looked. And Dadius made both games.
Oh, we did.
Huh. That's messed up.
Plot thickens.
Because I never really put that together.
Yeah. Well, more to research here then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Snarb has solved the Scooby-Doo mystery of the glowing light on Kane Marco's face.
Zoinks. All right, so we got one more arcade game to cover. This time I'm going to hand it off to Mike, because it is The Punisher.
Let me just say this up front. I think the Punisher is an extremely goddamn dicey character to write. He's not supposed to be idolized in any fucking way whatsoever, and yet, like, I don't want to get too political, but, like, the gun lovers in this country have, like, the Punisher skull on their fucking windshields on their trucks. Just fuck off with that, seriously.
Yeah, we'll keep that in a moment. But let's talk about the game.
Yeah. That aside, this game is really fucking cool. It is one of my more favorite Capcom beat 'em ups because Frank is just so smooth control. He like has this rolling kick, this almost like sort of crescent slash kick. He got these grenades. There's lots of freaking weapons he can pick up, and then there are lots of segments where he actually brings out a gun when other enemies are armed, and you just go to town on them. The graphics really cut the style of the comics at the time, and the pre-Samuel Jackson / Ultimate Nick Fury is Player 2, which I don't know how deep a reach that was at the time, but certainly I couldn't think of any other video games in the 90s that had Nick Fury in it. So
Well, it makes more sense to have him than Red Superman.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the fact they actually didn't just lazily, go with like whatever the U.S. agent version of Punisher is supposed to be was definitely very commendable. And yeah, like all the characters look very neat. There are some relatively deep reaches. Like I hadn't heard of Bushwhacker before playing this game, but I like his transformy arm. And Bonebreaker is actually apparently more of an X-Men villain, so part of the Reavers or whatever. So that was weird, but whoever made this game certainly knew their stuff when it came to the comics. Although, very strangely enough, Jigsaw, who most more or less credit to be the Punisher's arch enemy, he was present in this game, but he was only a head swap mid-boss that you fought in the last stage. And, yeah, it was weird. I don't know if they just kind of ran out in the budget on that one, but some foibles here and there. I just think that this is not only one of Capcom's better playing beat 'em ups, but it's also one of their fairer beat 'em ups to boot. I think I'm on record for only spending 2 credits on this one to actually beat it, which is absolutely I take far fucking more than that to beat almost any other beat 'em up as well. But it's solid. It's relatively easy to get into, and hey, I even remember seeing it in arcades back in the 90s and digging it even then. So I am very biased towards most of Capcom's beat 'em ups, but can you blame me?
No. How about you, Sam?
This is one that I have never played.
Really?
Oh,
Not once.
man. I'm disappointed, man.
It's worth playing. Just steer clear of the Genesis port. It's not terrible, but it's not great either.
Noted.
I keep forgetting the Genesis port exists. Something about it just feels very Western made.
Because it is.
Exactly. I don't know how better to put it.
How about you, James?
It's definitely one of my favorites. Not just superhero games, but beat 'em ups in general. It's just
Absolutely.
It's just a ridiculously solid engine that's in there. One of the things that you were wondering why the Reavers are in there.
Yes.
I'm gonna mention something kind of weird. One of the comic storylines that was going on in 1989 before a lot of these games were out and could have influenced the reference material that these companies were handed. It was called Acts of Vengeance. It was basically there was a group of villains, and they decided what they were going to do was orchestrate a scheme that would cause villains to attack superheroes that they normally didn't fight. So that's when you get stuff like the Juggernaut versus Thor, which if they were looking at Avengers source material, they could have been handed that issue. I think it was 411, and that also leads into the New Warriors introduction. But for one issue, not one issue, 2 issues. The Juggernaut, who was beating the crap out of Thor, he was an Avengers villain just for that short time. There's a bunch of other characters in other video games, like I think Boomerang fought Wolverine. So if they handed out reference material, Boomerang was an X-Men villain because he fought Wolverine at one time. So that's why he might have showed up in the NES game. The Reavers and it was Reavers, Dr. Doom, and his robot. That robot you fight through different parts in this. And Bushwhacker, they're all not normally Punisher villains, but they were in his issues of Acts of Vengeance in the crossover issues.
Wow.
So, because Bushwhacker's a Daredevil villain, Dr. Doom was basically everybody's villain at this point, and the Reavers popped up for a while in some issues of the Punisher. So as weird as it is, you end up seeing Bonebreaker in 2 different beat 'em ups in the 90s.
Yeah, right. He was also a not boss, but he was in the X-Men arcade game as well. That's right.
Well,
Crazy.
But yeah, I definitely agree. It's one of the best superhero games, one of the best beat 'em ups. Period. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
Bingo.
well, we're obviously not going to be able to cover everything we want to tonight, but I do want to touch on a couple other games before we sign off. Well, for one thing, we've basically talked about nothing but Marvel and DC so far. So let's take a look at a few other games that were not based on Marvel or DC properties. For example, you had Shakan the Forever Man, Dinosaurs for Hire, and X Mutants for the Genesis. There was Wildcats for the Super NES, and there was the arcade Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, in which a completely separate game was released for the Sega CD. Personally, I hate Shakan. Love the story, love the idea, would love to read the comics, hate the game. Game Gear one's not bad, though. Dinosaurs for Hire desperately wants to be Contra and fails at every level. X Mutants, I basically forgot about until we were about to do this stream. Never played Wildcats, but the arcade Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is pretty darn good.
Very damn good, yes.
Yeah, never played the Sega CD one, though. So, anything to add about these, Prime?
Yeah, there's a weird Capcom Street Fighter connection with Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. You know how that's basically the outside adaptation for I know I'm going to mangle the pronunciation of this. Xenozoic Tales.
Yes.
By Mark Schultz. The guy who got that together with the cartoon and everything else, that was Steve D'Souza. Now you know Steve D'Souza.
Oh man.
What movie he did, right?
Street Fighter the movie.
Oh boy.
And he also wrote the cartoon. You go on Tubi now; they've got episodes up on it, and I finally got to see it because I didn't know it was on there until now. And that's one of the best looking and best written Saturday morning cartoons, American ones. That's one of the best ones I've seen. Period. It's an amazing looking cartoon, but I'm guessing he had something to do with the Capcom deal for that. And I think that's what it said on Wikipedia anyway, but you never know with that. But that is a really weird Capcom connection.
I had no idea about that. How about you, Sam? Anything to say about any of those at all?
I haven't played any of these, honestly. I haven't played Shotgun, Dinosaurs for Hire, X Mutants. The only one that I'm really fascinated by is the idea that there was a Wildcats SNES game, because there was a 13-episode TV show of Wildcats that aired, and it's been reviled by every Wildstorm fan since, and even roundly mocked by Alan Moore in his own Wildcats issues. So the idea that there's a Wildcats Super Nintendo game based off of the TV show, it just boggles my mind. I didn't know it existed until we were sitting down to do the stream.
Yeah, neither did I. How about you, Mike? Anything about any of those?
Well, Chakan, I certainly like the idea and aesthetics of, but yeah, I never really got much into the gameplay, but my bestie Snarb in the chat really likes it, and I can only say I think it has merit, but I think it's also quite an acquired taste.
Definitely.
Also, the music to the first Air Realm stage is kind of great and really hurts my ears at the same time, so there is that.
That's Gems.
Yeah, it is very fucking Gems, for better or worse. Dinosaurs for Hire I didn't play much, and it's like, why play it when I could just play hardcore instead, you know? X Mutants I know jacked a little about. I confused the name with the really shitty Eternal Champion spin-off Experts, which, ooh, man,
yeah, let's not talk about that one.
All the ass. And what was the other one that wasn't Cadillacs Dinosaurs?
Let me see.
Dinosaurs for Hire?
Yeah.
No,
you mentioned that.
Wildcats.
Yeah, Wildcats. I actually brought this up to Sam first, if I'm not mistaken. He was rather shocked to learn about its existence. However, I've never really played it much. The only thing I really know Wildcats for is that one of its stage musics is used in a Doom mod I like quite a lot called Realism. Honestly, that's my only real connection to it. Unfortunately, since the music is possibly or possibly not by what is now the extremely infamous Tommy Tallarico, I don't know who actually composed the damn music now, so I don't know. It's good for what it is, but I just don't know if Tommy did it. That's its whole other thing. I don't want to get into it on this stream.
Yeah,
that's a real
that's-
fucking deep rabbit hole.
I've steered clear of that forever, and I'd like to keep steering clear of it.
Absolutely. That's totally fair. Cadillacs and Dinosaurs fucking rules. I'm not sure if I like it or The Punisher more, but they're both really goddamn high up there. Just really like the aesthetics. Mustafa Cairo is my personal favorite character. He's just kind of the whole package in that one. Especially his running attack is very efficient to just spam. But yeah, the aesthetics are really cool. Just punching the shit out of poachers and, of course, the occasional dinosaur that you have to pacify with your fists, probably. And there's a mutant in there that looks like Blanca for some reason, because why not? There's just really a lot of cool things about the game. And maybe not to the degree of the Punisher, I do generally find it one of Capcom's less quarter munchy beat 'em ups. Except for the boss Slice. That fucker is an asswipe and I hate him. But aside from I will always be the sweariest champion in all of these. So, yeah, C&D is great. It, Punisher, and Alien vs. Predator are, I believe, my top 3 favorite Capcom beat 'em ups of all time. And Battle Circuit's also really close, but that's immaterial. But yeah, C&D's excellent. Definitely play if you haven't.
Anyway, we're going to leapfrog over a lot of these other ones, including the Marvel vs. Capcom games. Sorry, James. When we do a versus fighter game, we'll have to have you on so you can talk about that.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So, something we don't usually cover on these roundtables are more modern games. And I'd like to bring up a couple of those before we go. And mainly the reason I didn't just make this exclusively about retro games because I wanted to talk about my favorite, which is Captain America Super Soldier for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Yeah, it's based on the MCU Captain America. In fact, he's even voiced by Chris Evans in the game, if I remember correctly.
He is, yes.
And I had so much fun with that. It was like Batman Arkham Asylum light. So it distilled it down to the, most core elements and just didn't drag anything out to where it's like, I would rather watch this as a movie. It was just fun moving, and I'm also a sucker for like that particular time period. So I loved it. It's a mainstay in my 360 collection. How about you, James? You ever play that one?
I'm not lucky enough to have played that, but the more I hear you talk about it, the more I realize I'm just going to have to track down a copy and get that. Especially because it's Captain America. He was one of my favorites when I was a kid because of the old cartoon with the theme song, and the surprise that they were able to make a movie where he was actually Captain America and not does this A on my head stand for France, dickhead, ultimate Captain America. I mean, but once you talked about it, I checked out some other stuff, and they threw in some other Marvel characters and made what they thought they would look like in MCU at the time. Yeah. I think they had what's her name? Arnim Zola was in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, that makes me want to check the game out. I've got to see that.
That is worth it, and it shouldn't be too expensive either. So, how about you, Sam? Did you ever play this one?
I have only checked it out on YouTube, and that's mostly because of your glowing praise. It does look very much like Batman Arkham Light, so but it's a much lighter tone as well than the Arkham series was. So I feel like it really fits the MCU overall.
Oh, definitely. So, how about you, Mike?
First off, that A on my forehead dickhead thing, was that like a Guy Gardner-esque take on Captain America or some bullshit like that?
No,
I
that
don't
was
know.
Noir.
Yeah. I don't know what the problem with the Ultimate Marvel Universe was. I didn't really get into it.
I won't poke into it either. That just sounds like a wreck. Anyway, I have played Super Soldier in full, and yes, it is somewhat derivative of Arkham Asylum, except that it is considerably more linear instead of the Metroid approach that the Arkham games take, which, as I recall, that fit Rob's palette better because I think Asylum just kind of overwhelmed and or bored him after a while. So Super Soldier taking that and distilling it into a more straightforward action format, I think, does make for its own very enjoyable game, distinct from its quote unquote parent, and plus, just throwing the shield at Nazi Hydra goons,
Which is great.
never gets old, absolutely. Yeah, I just really like the aesthetics of it. It is maybe a little bit jank, but it is just an eminently fun game that made me wish that the MCU would have had more worthy tie-ins like this. Unfortunately, all the other Phase 1 tie-ins it got really sucked, and they kind of shuttered their games division. But, Super Soldier was, I believe, also made, I believe the studio's called Next Level, and they were also the development studio that made the fantastic Wii version of Punch-Out. So, yeah, they definitely had good talent working on that. So, yeah, Super Soldier's good stuff. Very underrated, and, if cheap, then pick it up while it still is.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think we can probably squeeze one more in. Would you guys like to tackle the Injustice games or the Ultimate Alliance games? I know virtually nothing about either of them, so I'll leave it up to you.
I know more about
leave
the
this up to
Ultimate
you
Alliance
guys.
games than the Injustice games, personally.
On the flip side, I know much more about Injustice and Ultimate Alliance, so James, you're the tiebreaker here.
Boy. Well, I've played Injustice, so I guess it's Injustice this time.
Sorry, Sam.
No worries.
All right, so as someone who's never played the Injustice games, fill me in. James, go ahead and go first.
Okay. The whole series takes place in an alternate universe where the Joker actually managed to murder off Lois Lane, and of course Superman turns evil, and both sides of the superhero community split into different camps on how things should be handled now that Joker's done this. So it's kind of a war between these two factions. And the weird part about it is, as much as it's got this kind of grim dark quality to it that, I don't know, I'm more of an old school fan. It's kind of off-putting to me and kind of tired because I lived through the 80s. I've seen grimdark already. Saw that, wore the t-shirt, was on the ride, bought the cereal.
Exactly.
Even with that, you can play these games, you can tell that these people like DC Comics stuff, the old school stuff, the fundamental stuff. There are little character quirks here and there, including how the Flash uses his powers, the way Green Arrow fights. I mean, it's kind of infuriating because the classic ingredients are there, and you've got the great voice acting in it. You've got people who are working in the shows. You've got Kevin Conroy doing Batman's voice. You've got Mark Hamill as a Joker. And I mean, even the people who aren't normally those characters' voice actors did a great job in it. And I mean, I'm more of a Capcom fighting kind of player. That's more my vibe, but they're still fun to be had in the games, and it's a pretty good showcase of DC stuff. If only they, it's just the grim dark thing of it, and you're basically playing Superman being a villain.
Yeah.
And that you've got that fan base that likes that kind of stuff. But I mean, I've seen that so many times before. I mean, before we even got to this game, and it's kind of tired to me. But they're still a fundamentally great game underneath all that. So if you like DC Comics, just go ahead and give the game a shot, and just don't try to think about the storyline too much, because you'll get to see some pretty cool superhero DC type stuff in there.
That's cool, at least. Mike, since you've played it, what about you?
Yeah, what do I want to put on it that James hasn't already? Yeah, I can definitely tell that NetherRealm, that the studio who made it, also, of course, the Mortal Kombat guys, are certainly fans of the comics. I mean, in what other game is Solomon Grundy a playable character of all characters? Exactly. Sadly, he didn't return for the sequel, but we did get Gorilla Grodd and Swamp Thing in Injustice 2, so that's pretty goddamn excellent. Yeah, the rosters, for the most part, just have a lot of really cool cuts. Some that you would expect. Some might argue there is a little bit of a problem that the Batman family and gallery is maybe a little bit overtly dominant, which, DC being what it is, I'm not surprised. I won't protest it too much. But yeah, I think the second game was better at keeping a diverse roster, but the first game still has some rad characters in it too, although goddamn if Killer Frost isn't a reach. I had never heard of her before that game. I was like, I really would have expected Captain Cold to go here, guys. Who was included in the sequel, so, like, totally on point there. Yeah, I think the games play alright as well. I mean, I know that NetherRealm's fighters, both Mortal Kombat and Injustice, aren't really especially popular among more hardcore fighting game community components. I can kind of see that they're really not as technically polished as something by like Capcom or SNK, but I think they're fun enough to play for what they're worth, and they do feel faster and less conservative than Mortal Kombat does. Biggest indicator being that you actually hold back the block in these games instead of holding a separate block button instead. Yeah, I know, right? What an innovation. Why did they not think of this before? Yeah, I think there's really a lot to like about the style of the Injustice games, but I also do agree with James that Evil Superman was already getting old in 2013 when the first game debuted, and then time just got worse and worse and worse with that, and I really wish that wasn't the impetus for the Injustice storyline, which, by the way, did also get its own full-developed comics series as well, because of course it did. I don't actually know how great that series is. I think I've heard mixed here and there. So,
it's my understanding that comic is also sort of quasi-canon, because Superman's actual real son in the comics, John Kent, has crossed over into the Injustice universe and encountered that Superman and come back.
Huh. Oh, I'll be damned.
So,
I wouldn't have guessed that.
A legit alternate timeline.
That it is. It is. Well, I think it could be certainly grim darkier. At least the Joker gets killed early, so I can't accuse the stories of succumbing to Joker mania like so much of fucking DC Comics does nowadays. So there is that. But yeah, I'm just mixed on the impetus of Superman being the overall big bad. But I will say, though, that I thought it was an even worse move for the first game's story mode to puss out and bring in good Superman from an alternate universe to solve everything. That is kind of a weak move. I respect much more that Injustice 2, mixed of the storyline is. Injustice 2 stayed entirely within the Injustice universe and didn't employ any cross-time or space shenanigans. And I quite like how that one turned out more, where, Batman and Superman had to put aside their differences because Brainiac was fucking shit up. Yeah, so mixed on the stories, but gameplay's alright, and fan service is really fantastic. Oh, and 2 also has Hellboy and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles guest starring, so that's cool too.
Well, Sam, anything you want to add based on what you know about it?
Not really. There's been very little of the character designs that have really been compelling to me, and the fact that this started off as a Mortal Kombat spin-off just didn't really go over well with me, because it's my understanding that Injustice began life as Mortal Kombat versus the DC Universe.
Yeah, that was kind of technically the actual canon Mortal Kombat 8. Screwy enough, that actual game that was very mixed, and then they kind of really didn't do so great with the violence aspect that people come to play Mortal Kombat for. It was an odd mishmash, I think, compromised in too many corners, but yeah, they just decided instead do that again, we'll just make a full-on DC fighter and maybe just guest star 1 or 2 MK characters in it, so that is how that came to be, more or less.
Well, before we sign off, I do have one question for Sam. I forgot to ask this earlier, but that whole Superman red and blue thing, wasn't he blue Superman during the whole initial Zariel arc?
Yes. Yes, he was. But that was before he got split. And he wouldn't have been Energy Superman if Morrison had had any kind of say in things. But they basically said, nope, he's Energy Superman right now, so he's got to be Energy Superman in your comic. And originally what Grant Morrison had wanted was for that bit where Superman pulls the moon back into orbit. He wanted him to, wrap the moon in chains and literally pull it back into orbit. But because of the Energy Superman form, he did the whole giving the moon a magnetic field thing instead. And that's the kind of genius lateral thinking that Grant Morrison's kind of known for.
I remember you sent me that graphic novel with Zariel's first appearance, and I forget who it was, either Flash and Green Lantern, and it's this is the guy who thought he couldn't live up to the myth. He's wrestling an angel.
Yeah, I think that was the Flash, because I can see the look on his face as he's saying it. Howard Porter just made that.
Expressions, yes.
There is only one thing that I have learned listening to many of Sam's rants about Real Comics TM, and that is that Grant Morrison seems like the only comics writer who's fucking right 100% of the time.
No. That is, you took the wrong thing from that. Grant Morrison.
I'm being superfluous. I'm sure he has had his off days.
Oh, I mean, he's one of the few comic scribes that truly enjoys the medium he's working in. He doesn't try to change it into something else or try to make it more adult or try to say, oh, now how would this work in the real world? He embraces the ridiculousness of it all and just accepts it at face value and is just takes that in truly bizarre and inspired directions, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's almost like Jim Carrey, where he's operating on a different level of comics writing than most other comics writers. And it's here's this issue's experiment. And if you don't like it, okay, next issue there's another experiment. So
I see.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to end for the night. To anyone that's still here who was here at the beginning, sorry about the audio issues. It took up almost the first 20 minutes, but for the most part, they're fixed. And as an aside, just to let you know, everyone here in the stream tonight is involved in some capacity with one or more of my books. For example, James, he's the cover artist of pretty much all of them. And both Mike and Sam have contributed stories to Digital Archaeology, which, as far as I know, will be seeing the light of day before the end of the year.
Excellent.
And not only that, they've contributed multiple stories, both of them. So, good stuff. And, well, other than that, next week we have a Gradius stream coming up, which will be featuring Mr. Matthews. Mike, of course, will be back as my co-host, and a very unexpected guest we're going to be having on there, who, if any of you read memoirs, you know him, and you might have even heard me talk about him from time to time. My old friend, Chris Bromley, the man who helped shaped my video game tastes for, ever. So he'll be joining us on that. And then the week after that, we have a stream devoted to Treasure planned, which will again feature Mike, seeing as he's my co-host. And Bromley will be coming back for that one, and also Snarb is in the chat right now. Will be there as well. So next Saturday at 9 and the following Saturday after 9, look for those two streams. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this, and it was great having all you guys here.
Great to be here.
Yep, great to be here.
So maybe, at some point we'll reconvene to cover some of the games we missed. So we'll see what happens.
Like X-Men Mutant Apocalypse.
Yeah, exactly.
We totally forgot to mention that one, didn't we? Oh.
Yep, but we can only fit so much into such a limited amount of time.
There's always another issue.
Exactly.
This is true.
So, all right, everyone. Have a good night, and catch you on the next stream.
Good night, everybody.
See ya.
Good night.